Hey, welcome to the Gig Life Podcast. I'm your host, Stevie Taylor. My guest today is Sydney-based drummer Jack Robert. Jack is a phenomenal drummer. In 2010, he won the DrumTech Best Up-and-Coming Drummers Award, and then from then he's gone on to play, or he still plays, with Ricki. He's currently playing with Tkay Maidza, Thundamentals, Stephen Taranto. He's recorded sample packs. He's a real heavy on the festival scene and just a hell of a nice guy. So it was great to sit down and have a chat with him. We've been trying to do it for a while and managed to lock it down. So just a sound warning on this one. We recorded this at the Rocks Brewery in Alexandria. I might add that that's right in the middle of a flight path. So every couple of minutes or so, you hear a plane sort of fly past, and there were dogs inside the pub. We had a bit of an audience, and with a few people actually coming up to us while we were recording towards the end. But try not to focus on that stuff. Just listen to what we're here for, and that's to hear Jack's story. So check it out, eh? This is episode 141. Jack Robert. Here we go. So I think we're rolling.
Beautiful.
What's good, Jack Robert?
What's going on, man? How are you? Thanks for having me.
Yeah, bro. What's going on?
Man, today I've just been kind of a chill day, bit of a prep day. I've been organising a bunch of songs that I have coming up that I'm going to be recording, hopefully.
Your own stuff?
Not my own stuff, no, a bunch of different projects for some friends. Like I'm doing one for like a movie soundtrack, and then another stuff, like a couple others for a guy's solo record. So yeah, kind of putting those together at the moment, just like getting them, just like literally downloading and putting them in folders and organising, and before I start really going through and learning the stuff.
Yep.
But I'll get to that stuff in the next couple of months, hopefully. And then apart from that, like just chilling. Just a bit of a day off. So it's been pretty crazy the last few months.
Yeah.
And I worked like right up until I didn't work New Year's Eve, which was actually nice.
Do you usually work New Year's Eve?
Yeah, I think that's like the last few years anyway, that's how it's kind of worked out. Last year was particularly hectic. I was doing a festival run, and then I remember getting back into town on like New Year's Eve. Like I think I flew back from Perth or something like that from I did Wildlands last year, and then got back to Sydney on New Year's Eve in the morning from Perth, and then I had like 2 like local gigs in town that day, starting from the afternoon. But it was one of those like take my stuff to like the first gig, to the second gig, go do the first gig, then go to the second gig, and then I can get home to like after midnight, obviously. And then, the next day, like on the first, I had field day in the Domain. So it was like kind of wearing different hats, jumping back and forth between things. But that was so a bit different this year. But I kind of welcome those crazy logistical challenges. It's fun, and I like doing that sort of stuff.
Man, I don't have the. That's not me, eh? That's
it's.
Way.
I mean, as long as you're there, you kind of get taken with the current, I guess. But you do kind of miss out on a bit of sleep and those sort of things. But it's fine when you're in the middle of it. I love it. So
who did you do the field day gig with?
Field day last year was with Tkay Maidza.
Yeah.
So I did. So we kind of started a festival run. I started working with her like June, July last year.
Yep.
I got a call from an MD mate of mine, Joel Farland, and he kind of sent through like, kind of happened over time. I think I got a call like a few months before, and then there's a nice plane going on.
Yeah. I'll explain where we are in a minute.
Sure. Classic mascot flight path. But so Joel called me in like kind of early in the year, I think, from memory, and then nothing kind of happened for a while, and then was kind of like, you're free for these dates, blah, blah, blah. And then I was like, yeah, man, absolutely, like keen to jump in. And he ended up sending me like a live recording from her US band, which was like pretty, like very live, very kind of gospel-esque. So yeah, that was like the first thing I got, and like jumped into rehearsals and
gospel-esque as from a drumming point of view.
From a kind of like
choppy.
Drumming and kind of like arrangement point of view.
Yeah, okay.
More planes. So yeah, I think because she's obviously from Adelaide originally, and then had been living in the States, and I think it had been a minute since she'd done any Australian shows, so she kind of like since being in America, she'd kind of changed how her show sounded and the approach to it. And I think when they came back, like they wanted to kind of keep that sort of approach. And so we basically got sent this recording of her American band, and it was kind of right up my alley. Like I spent a lot of time checking out that sort of music and that sort of approach to kind of modern pop, hip hop, R&B sort of shows. So I was pretty stoked to get that call, and then we jumped into rehearsals kind of just off of that desk recording, and kind of finessed and massaged everything from there. And then so the first thing we did was Vivid. We did the Opera House, which was amazing. I'd never played the Opera House before. So that was a really cool experience.
So that was your first.
That was the first show with Tkay.
There's a video of that, isn't there?
There is. Yeah, they actually
looks like floral.
Yeah. She had like all these flowers on stage. Jarrell's playing bass.
Jarrell, yep.
Yeah.
Yep. I watched that.
Oh, you saw the gig? Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah.
They did it. I'm pretty sure it was broadcast live, like online. I think maybe on the Opera House's YouTube channel and then their website or something like that. So I guess kind of a bit of a hectic first run with her, but we'd had like a week of rehearsals leading up to it. And it was funny, actually. I hadn't seen Jarrell I'd bumped into him like here and there over the years, but like when I moved to Sydney in like 2014, we started doing like some stuff with Thundamentals together. So we did, and like our first gig together was in Hawaii with Tim. So we had like this really cool kind of experience, and I loved playing with him, loved hanging with him. Like he's such a monster bass player.
Yep.
One of my favorites for sure. And then it kind of didn't really, when the Tim thing kind of chilled out a little bit, we didn't work together again until 2022. And then so we went from like Hawaii to then like the Opera House. So it's like we have this thing now where the only gigs we do together are like a really cool situation. So we got to try and keep that going. But man, so I was really stoked to hear that he was going to be on that, and it's been awesome kind of hanging with him and learning from him. And because it's like a kind of simple setup. It's just the three of us on stage, me, Jarrell, and T, and Jarrell. And it's kind of an interesting stage setup. Like Jarrell and I, right on the flats. Jarrell and I like face each other on stage. And then like we're kind of facing inwards, and then T's facing outwards. So it's kind of a slightly different dynamic to usual as well. And like often you're doing like the triangle, kind of everyone's facing forward. But this is like a different thing. So there's a lot of like look exchanging and kind of in little things that we'll do on the gig, which makes it really fun.
So how did that setup come about?
As in the visual side of it?
Yeah.
I'm actually not too sure. I think I asked T once, and she's just like,
so that was her idea.
I think it's coming from her, yeah. I think it was just a point of difference from other shows. So we're kind of the two, like, we're both up on rises. So it's kind of like a slightly unique visual, I guess, for a three-piece stage. So, but getting back to the Opera House thing, you're right. That was, she had like a whole heap of flowers on stage, which was a reference to some of the music. And then we kind of, which sounds like, there was flowers, but it was like there was a lot of setup time for the flowers, and I think they had a lot of people involved kind of curating and making it look how it did, and it turned out really, really well. And then we did the Opera House, and we did the same thing like a week later in Melbourne for a festival called Vivid was Sydney, and then I can't think, but it was it's kind of like a one-day thing again, but it was at the Forum. But I think in Melbourne it was like a 2-week kind of arts sort of cultural thing around the city. And this, we were the only guys playing that day at the Forum, and we did that, and that was another really cool show. And so fast forward, we had like another 4 or 5 months off. She went back, and I think she was doing some support shows with someone else, just like a DJ setup. And then fast forward to like the New Year's kind of time, and we kicked off with Meredith in Victoria, which was really cool. Kind of down where I used to live, actually. But I'd never been to Meredith Festival before. And that was awesome, man. Like, we get there at like kind of middle of the day, and it's just a one-stage setup, whereas most of these festivals are kind of multi-stage, like at least an A and B, and then often there'll be like other side stages and stuff as well. Kind of gets smaller and smaller, and depending on the setup. But Meredith was amazing because it's like one stage, so everyone's like locked in on that stage. So by the time you get there at like 11, 12 in the day, everyone's already pumping and raring to go. And like,
you're all backstage, side of stage.
Yeah, so I remember like getting there and like getting my phone, like looking around the corner. I'm like, holy fuck! Like there's so many people here already. And then we went on till nighttime, and at that point, like the visuals for her show and the lighting for her show is like really next level to anything I'd kind of experienced before. And that was, I think, looking back now, that's probably one of the best shows for me personally that we've done together.
Cool.
I think just the vibe was right, and it was just one of those. And there's so many intangibles with shows, I reckon, like looking back and going, and this was cool, this was like, this one didn't feel right, and it's kind of sometimes hard to pinpoint what it is, but for whatever reason, that one felt really, really good. And then so we kicked off with Meredith, and then we did Wildlands, which was like 3 or 4 around the country. And that rolled into Field Day, and then I think we had a couple of the Wildlands shows after New Year's Day in like the next week or so. So yeah, that was it. So yeah, last New Year's was a hectic December, January. It was a pretty hectic time, and that kind of after the Tkay shows that rolled like I think the next day or so I was rolling straight into rehearsals with the Thunders boys. So we kicked off their national tour in like mid-January or something. So that was
full on.
It was full on, yeah. It was great. Like again, the busier for me, generally the better. I feel like I'm where I'm meant to be when I'm in that sort of sort of flow.
Yep.
And everything's kind of jumping from one thing to another, but still like everything's
So you're happy to be in that situation.
Yeah, I kind of liked it. I mean, sometimes it's a bit chaotic. Like there was a situation recently where, what was it? It was Tkay again. We were doing a show in. We had a show in Victoria, I think. This was actually because we just did the Spilt Milk, like we were just talking about before with Buddy. We just did the Spilt Milk festival run, and that's like Ballarat, Gold Coast, Canberra, and Perth. And the Ballarat one, obviously, like when you fly into Melbourne and you got to drive, like usually it's like 40 minutes to an hour to get from the airport to the city. But for this one we're going. So Melbourne's always like a little bit tricky logistically and always takes a bit longer. But for this, Ballarat was like kind of regional Victoria. So we were going to get down to Ballarat, do the show, and then I got a call to sub in for Jess Malboy. Kind of not long before that, because my mate Billy has just started MDing her, and they've kind of switched things around recently. And Billy and I have done a bunch of other stuff together. So he gave me a call to kind of sub in for that. And I was like, and it was the same day as the Ballarat show with T, but it was back in the city. So I was like, let me check. He's like, man, are you free? I'm like, fuck, bro, like I'd love to be.
Is it doable?
Can
I get my own helicopter?
Yeah. It was a bit hectic. So I did the figures and like did the math on the times and everything. And I was like, it's actually, we were playing early enough at the festival where it was going to work out that I could make it back if I just hauled it really quickly from like finishing, pack up, and then jet straight away back into the city.
I'm getting fucking anxious just thinking about that. Like,
whereas I'm getting excited. I'm like, bring it. Let's do it. Let's make it happen.
That's cool.
But evidently the gig ended up getting cancelled for whatever reason. Unfortunately, because I ended up learning the set and everything, which was like a cool experience and exercise in and of itself, because Billy's arrangements and everything on that show now, like pretty hectic. Like the stuff we've done before, like he called me to kind of sub in for Wafia. I think that's in the last couple of years. So we've done a few shows together with her, and that show's also like Billy also loves the really gospel kind of Americanized, I guess, approach to the pop R&B sort of shows. So he and I really click in that sense. Very funny character as well, but incredible musician. So he called me for that, and that kind of went pretty well. I mean, with the Wafia thing, there was like no rehearsal or anything, so it was very much like I think he sent me like some rehearsal recordings and maybe some live recordings as well, kind of like learn it, and then you're on a flight to wherever, and then I'll see you at the gig sort of thing. Whereas with Jess, actually with the Jess thing, I think it was going to be the same. I don't think we were going to get to rehearse or anything. So, but you kind of get used to those sort of stipulations. It's like if you say yes, that's what's kind of involved sometimes. So especially when you're subbing, which I've been fortunate enough to do a bunch of the last few years. But it does get a little bit hectic in terms of like kind of you're never 100% comfortable on the gig, because like obviously when you're subbing there's the music, but there's also like who's mixing you, how your ear's going to sound, how's, you know, what are the logistics, like who else is on the gig, like in terms of, is the vibe going to be like cool? Is everyone going to be like stressed that you're kind of like there's so many things involved outside of like here's the actual music. But you kind of, for me, I've kind of learned how to navigate that as best as I'm not perfect by any stretch, but as best as I can, and kind of get the job done, you know, with what I'm given. So unfortunately the crazy situation with T and Jess and the one day didn't quite happen, but I'm happy that it almost did. Would have been fun. Would have been a fun story. But he actually called me for a Jess thing in the next couple of months. So I'll just have to spend some time going back over the show. But I don't at this stage. That's the only gig for that day. So so it should be a little bit more relaxed. But, but we'll see maybe
that's one to prioritise too, perhaps.
Yeah, man. Yeah. When I listen to the music, I was listening to the set. I'm like, oh god, it's definitely not something like there are so many shows that you can kind of almost anticipate where there are like some very kind of not cliche but like go-to arrangement sort of things that people will use, and I think if you're used to working with the same sort of MDs all the time, you kind of get used to how everyone works. So you can kind of almost you can. What I'm trying to say, you can anticipate what's going to happen. Gotcha. So even if things aren't completely locked in, especially with limited rehearsal or no rehearsal, you can kind of, you know, you still get your way through it. And with slates and cues and everything these days, that obviously helps to some extent. But yeah, listening to the Jess set that Billy sent through, it was like, I mean, I know where it's gonna go, like stylistically, and I'm familiar with a bunch of the music, but yeah, what he's kind of done with the show is pretty incredible, and definitely for me, like on par with anything that's like on the world stage, you know, like he's really done a lot of work on it. Having said that, like the show before was also incredible, with Daryl and Paul and all the boys, you know, Buddy and Kevin and, you know, everyone who's been on it. But yeah, that's obviously, you know,
it's a progression, man.
Yeah, totally. And it's like, and it's just a different flavor, like not better or worse, but she's obviously great at hiring really, really talented people to help her with their shows. And yeah, it was really nice to get the call. So hopefully the gig kind of comes through. I've known Jess for a little while, like just through friends and that sort of thing. So I've spent a little bit of time hanging out together, but we've never worked together. So in that context anyway. So yeah, so fingers crossed it kind of happens and we see how it goes. But yeah, it'll be a fun show. The music's really cool and very. I like doing some of that pop sort of stuff. So yeah, we'll see.
Good stuff, man.
Yeah, man.
All right, let's roll it right back to the beginning.
Sure.
Right? So you're from Victoria, right? From
Victoria, man. Yes, I grew up in a little coastal town. I say little, but it was smaller when I was there. It's grown a little bit now, but a place called Ocean Grove, which is like 20 minutes south of Geelong, and like an hour and a half south of Melbourne. So yeah, I grew up down there. I was there from like the age of 2 or 3 until maybe, when did I move? I think I moved to Sydney when I was 21 or 22. So yeah, I moved here in 2014 now, so 10 years this month actually. Yeah, in a few weeks it'll be 10 years. Wow. So yeah, I grew up down there, and yeah, there wasn't much happening musically, unless I kind of went to Melbourne.
I'm sure there would have been in your world at the time.
In my world, there was, yeah.
So
fortunately,
yeah. So what's the reason you're playing drums? And
yeah, so
was drums your first instrument? And
yeah, it was. Yep. Yeah, so my dad. So when I was born, my dad was playing professionally as a drummer, doing, you know, and they were living in Melbourne.
What's your dad's name?
His name's Bruno. So he was, and when I say playing professionally, like he was. And I know this is, everyone says, you know, but he was a phenomenal player, like a really, really amazing drummer, amazing ears, amazing hands. Like, basically everything that I've developed or I've learned or I completely owe to my upbringing with him.
That's
like
cool.
100%. Like, and anything that, like, without that foundation, anything else that anywhere else I've taken, it would never have happened. So
you yourself, and there's one other person that I can think of that's been on this podcast that has a similar sort of story, and that's Dan Kirby.
Right.
Because Dan Kirby's dad was a drummer.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
I actually think I might have listened to some. I've spoken to Dan a little bit online, but we've never met in person. But he's an amazing player as well, man.
But it's a similar sort of story. You know,
right.
Owes it all to his dad. And even his, the educating that he's doing now.
Yeah.
Sort of took over from his dad. So.
For sure.
But that's cool.
Similar situation, man. Like my dad was doing gigs and teaching as well. And in some capacity, my mum and dad have always been educators and teachers. So my mum's a career high school teacher in drama, dance, English, and dad spent a lot of years teaching drums, and then moved on to teaching. Kind of switched careers, but still heavily involved in training and educating and teaching in various degrees and at usually at really, really high levels. So I was
outside of music.
Outside of music, yeah. Yep. So
if you've got it, you got it, eh?
Yeah, and again, and I spent a lot of time with my dad, kind of teaching me in various ways. So so that the passion for education definitely seeped through to me as well. So I've spent a bunch of time teaching over the years too, and really enjoy that when the circumstances are kind of befitting, but. So at the time he was doing that for probably a 10-ish year period, in which I was born, and then so I was so we never did the formal lesson thing. We never did, it was never him okay, now we're gonna start practicing. He never, and it was never you're gonna be playing drums. It was never that. It was just I was kind of just drawn to it. It was just something that was around. There was gear around the house and. In one way or another, sticks lying around, pads lying around. It was just that sort of thing. So it was just a natural inclination, and I didn't really know any different. And then the other thing, indirectly, was that he had all these great records at home and music videos and all these different resources, basically a library of material for me, if I wanted to dive into. And
all different styles?
All different styles, man, yeah. So, again, the older I get, the more I look back and I go, I was extremely lucky to have that diversity at that age. Because even though I didn't really take playing, when I say seriously, as in it wasn't until I hit the age of maybe 10 or 11 that I decided that this is what I wanted to do with my life. And then from that point, everything became everything else that I was doing kind of started to fade away a little bit and take second priority. But until then, it was it was around and it was something that I would do. And when I felt the urge, but it wasn't something that I was kind of doing regularly, I guess. But from a very early age, man, I remember Dad saying that when I was born, he would play Miles Davis when I was kind of in the crib, it was that sort of vibe. Wow. And then the first he probably the artist that I kind of really gravitated towards was Phil Collins.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow,
so
man.
there's a bunch of which I hope never see the light of day in public.
Me too.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, there you go.
Yep.
Hectic.
Yep.
Yeah. So we have a bunch of probably very dated, grainy old home videos of me in front of the TV playing along to we had a couple of Phil's live shows. There was one at Perkins Palace in the 80s, and then one at live in Berlin in the early 90s. So. That was Phil, both with Chester Thompson. And for whatever reason, man, I don't know what it was, but I was super enamored by watching those and listening to that music. And like I said, there's videos of me impersonating Phil being a front man and all this sort of weird stuff. And that part of it kind of died off for me. I don't know where that went, but the drum, and it's definitely not there now. But the drumming side of it definitely remained and kind of simmered until I hit, like I said, about 10 and things really kind of escalated from there. But yeah, so Phil was a massive influence, and still is, man. Still love listening to those records and still go back and watch a bunch of those shows. And actually, he was the Welcome Back to the Airport.
Yeah.
Terminal 3, fucking hell. And the first gig actually that the first major gig that my parents took me to was Phil. I went to the Tennis Centre in Melbourne, which is now Rod Laver Arena, but. And I think it was 3 or 4 at the time, and that was the Both Sides tour, and that was Phil. Ricki Lawson was playing drums on that.
Yep.
Nathan East. So he changed the band up slightly to usual.
Yep. But Daryl
Sturm was still on it.
Yep.
I think Brad Cole was still playing keys.
Yep.
Amy Keys might have been doing BVs, and Yeah, so that was and I still remember, I have images of being at that gig. I remember thinking that Phil took forever to come out. That's the main recollection that I have,
Yep.
which was probably just my terrible sense of time. I was probably thinking that we were going to go and he was just going to be waiting there for us, but things took a little bit longer. And but yeah, so that was so my parents always have been super encouraging and supportive in that sense, but it was never been a case of like, you will practice or you will you will do this or that. It was kind of, it was just something that I really enjoyed. But yeah, as I said, in terms of diversity, like obviously Phil's stuff, Genesis was another big one, obviously. And then, but outside of that, man, it was like everything from Weather Report to Miles to Stevie Wonder to Earth, Wind and Fire to, man, it was so much different stuff to more progressive stuff, like a bunch of British stuff like Yes and like Alan Parsons, but like all different sorts of stuff.
And were you drawn to the drums on those?
Yeah, I think so.
Always,
yeah. And the other thing that I'm definitely forgetting a heap of music. Police, like Toto, all those sorts of bands, like mostly like 70s, 80s, I guess, stuff. Sting was another massive one. But again, some of those things didn't really hit until I was a bit older and a bit more mature. But for whatever reason, Phil was like the guy when I was really, really young.
Yep.
And the other thing that Dad had, which was also just a massive, just luck of the draw and blessing that I had access to it, was he had a bunch of like instructional videos as well. I'm talking like VHS, DCI music videos sort of vibes. Yeah, man.
Yeah, man.
The precursor to Hudson, like all that sort of stuff, So the main ones that I remember him having were, we had Omar Hakim's video, or one of them. We had a couple of Peter Erskine's ones. And these were like when these guys were kind of in their primes, I guess, kind of, really, really, doing everything. We had the Buddy Rich Memorial with Vinny,
Gad,
Steve Gadd and Dave Weckl. So I had that one. There were a few others. We had Alex Acuna's one.
Did you have the two Weckl videos?
I had Back to Basics.
Back to Basics.
I had the first one, yeah. And I think that was like, some of these weren't even official, because obviously like Dad was teaching a lot. So I think what happened is like, he used to work at, he was teaching out of Mackin's for a while, which was like the precursor to Drummers Paradise in Melbourne. Yep. And I imagine they like exchanged things and gave each other things at the time. So some of those videos were like kind of bootleg vibes. And the Weckl Back to Basic one was one of those. But man, when the time came, I absolutely rinsed all of those, and still to this day, like at one point I kind of got them all on DVD and like converted them all and put them on, like I've got them all on a hard drive now and still go back. Now they're probably all on YouTube, but again, so for whatever reason, I was so enamored with all those guys and listening and watching and learning that way. The other one, which was more of like an unknown one worldwide, but was Virgil's power drumming video. That was and we actually had Obsessive Rhythms as well. But for me, power drumming was like, that was something that for whatever reason, I don't know why, still can't really explain it, but that was something that even if Mum and Dad were like, if I was just doing anything like free time sort of vibe, that's something that I would want to put on and want to watch. And that continued for years. Like my mum and dad ended up putting me into like classical piano lessons when I was pretty young, and I did that when I can't think of what age, but I would have been maybe 6, and I probably for maybe not quite 10 years, but I did it for a while. And I remember sometimes trying to like get my mum to be like, instead of practicing piano today, can I just watch power drumming? And she's like, no, that's probably not what you should be doing. But I'm like, yeah. So that was another video and at the time, obviously, like you're only hearing and seeing what you can kind of take in. Me not really being aware of the fact that this was like legendary material and stuff still to this day, like I said, that I can go back to and still learn from, and still there's just seemingly like endless depth of information from that sort of caliber of player and musician and person. So like I said, I was exposed to all of this stuff quite early, and then when the time came to that I'd really decided I wanted to do it seriously, I dove in head first and started just going ham and practicing all the time. And like I said, I was up until that point, I was also playing like a lot of sport and was really into that. And
What were your sports?
Man, well, the main outside of music, my family was also really heavily involved in martial arts and that sort of thing. So I did that from like that and playing the drums. I feel like are the two things that I feel are very natural for me at this point. So, and I trained in a bunch of different styles of martial arts, but I started in like traditional karate, and my parents were also involved in that. And then later on, we started doing some boxing stuff and like MMA sort of stuff, and like just all different sorts of disciplines. And so I spent a lot of time doing that. So my childhood was kind of a little bit strange and unique, I guess, in that sense. I don't really remember spending a heap of time at home. It was always like, if I wasn't at school, I was either at, and then, like other sports, I was playing like footy and ended up playing soccer for years and played some tennis and like that sort of stuff. My friends, like I think AFL was probably the thing that I loved the most and was the most passionate about. Like I was watching it and playing a lot of it. My friends would probably laugh at me for that now, because once I decided to play drums, my skills quickly perished. But so I wouldn't be picked for the team these days, or in high school even. But at the time, like maybe like 6 to 10 or 11, I was pretty in love with AFL and that sort of thing. So, but yeah, man, like I said, like did the martial arts thing and like heroes of mine outside of the guys I mentioned musically were. I always looked up to boxers, and like Ali was always on my wall, Tyson was always on my wall, like all these sorts of guys. And there was something about the work ethic and their approach to developing their skills, and later on for me, like how they approached building their lives and their careers and all that was always really inspiring to me and still is. Who else? Schwarzenegger was another big one, obviously, like, outside of the movies, just like his career as a bodybuilder and then shifting into the movies. But again, his work ethic.
I don't know if you may know about his book, but he's got the doco on Netflix.
Yeah, I did watch the doco.
He's been doing the podcast rounds as well. I don't know if you've been listening to those.
I've checked out a bunch of those. Yeah, I've read a bunch of his books. I haven't got the most recent one, but I have read a bunch of his books before, like that are either on training or just his life sort of autobiographical. But super inspiring guy to me. Obviously, no one's perfect, and as you get older, people that you see as heroes and idols, you kind of and I've been in situations now, fortunately, where I've kind of been able to interact and hang out with some of the people that I used to look up to as a kid, and you do learn like some of those situations have been amazing. Some of them kind of leave a little bit to be desired, but you learn that that's life. That's being human, and you're as a kid, you're seeing people through a very narrow funnel at that point. And you're not taking into account that they're just normal humans, they're just normal people, and they each have their own struggles and all of that. So it's been cool, like, and that's been kind of a thing that I've definitely learned and continue to learn. Just humanizing every career kind of step and every like person you meet, and you think that everyone's like. You have that thing of people being on pedestals, but for me, I've learned to kind of almost get rid of that train of thought, because I definitely had it as a kid, very much like I want to be like so and so, I want to be able to do X, Y, and Z, and almost like everyone kind of has heroes, I guess, especially maybe it's a boy thing more as a kid, but yeah, I've kind of learned to kind of take bits and pieces from different people, again, whether it's playing or whether it's approach to handling your career or whatever it is, and kind of just apply it to your individual circumstances, because everyone's lives are so different and coming from a different place and different eras, and that that's been a big one for me. Having influences from a breadth of like a range of kind of eras. It's kind of interesting trying to apply something that maybe something really worked for someone in the 80s is not necessarily going to work for someone in 2024 or 2023 or whatever. So that there have been interesting lessons to try and kind of assimilate into now as well. Yeah, man. So I had such a range of influences. Like I said, from music to sport to film to whatever. And kind of tried to integrate all of that into my approach to practicing. Like I used to hear stories from Dad about Virgil's work ethic and all of that, and definitely, man, I went through a phase where I was trying to do exactly that. Was spending hours and hours each day, and would try and do the 8, 10, 12 hour practice days.
Really? Right.
Yeah, man, absolutely. Yeah. But it was fun to me. It was like, that's what I wanted to be doing. And everything else to me was like getting in the way, school included.
Yeah, okay.
I was like, I really felt like I knew And Tyson was another one. Hearing about the stories of him, kind of training young with Cuss and going through that whole process of like really having someone that was like helping form you into what you needed to be to have the career that you wanted. To me, that was like the dream. That was so exciting, and kind of still is, to an extent. That whole process of like going through a fight camp and really like digging in and I kind of applied that approach to practicing. Now, I will say that some of it doesn't apply, and I've learned that over the years. But and I think it is a little bit of a unique approach, having spent more time with musicians now. I mean, we're talking at a time when, hey. We're back, hey. We're talking at a time when I was pretty isolated in the sense of like that I wasn't hanging around with a lot of other musicians, or I wasn't like, so everything I was doing was basically on my own. So I was practicing on my own. I was playing along to a lot of records on my own. I was watching and listening to stuff and dissecting stuff on my own. So I spent a lot of time on my own, kind of trying to get everything together and get everything up to speed. And to me, the benchmark was all the guys that I mentioned earlier. So I'd set myself a very high bar, and to me, I was more than willing to put in whatever it took to kind of reach that level. And still am, it's obviously it's a process, and that process, kind of nice in a way with an art form, doesn't really, well, playing music anyway, doesn't really end. It's kind of a never-ending. There's not really a cap on it. So, and there's and I've also since learned that there's so much you learn from playing with other people and having experience playing professionally, and that you can't get from just practicing in a room, So there's.
Do you think that's a big reason why you have no problem trying to do 2 or 3 gigs with different people? So are you kind of are you chasing the experiences with the other people, or?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if these days if I'm chasing experience. I guess that's one way to frame it. I still feel like I've barely scratched the surface.
Yeah.
Professionally, or even like ability wise or anything like that. I still feel like I still have the same hunger and the same kind of mentality in some ways as I did when I was kind of starting out.
Yeah. Can I ask your age?
Yeah, I'm 32.
You're 32.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So I've been playing professionally now. I mean, it's all I've ever done.
Yep.
So
yeah, that was a question I was going to ask. Was there?
Yeah, sure.
Was there ever
since I was 18 now?
A thought of any other career? And from what you've been saying, I don't think.
Definitely not anything instead of drum, like playing music or being involved in music. If anything, it's been adding to that, in various ways. Like I'm really interested in business. I actually spent a very, very brief amount of time studying business, kind of simultaneously. So I'm interested in different aspects of the industry for sure, and even things outside of music I'm interested in. But and yeah, I mean, and since moving to Sydney, I've done a few things on the side. I've done a bit of acting. I've done.
We've got dogs too.
It's all happening.
It's all
Planes,
happening.
dogs. People are gonna be like, "Where the hell are they doing this interview?" So yeah, man. So I've done a bunch of stuff like hand in hand with playing drums, but playing the drums and doing the music thing has been the main thing for. Yeah, basically the main thing since I've turned pro, if you will, at 18. So yeah, and if I had it my way, I would have started doing that earlier. But I had to finish school and do all of that. So yeah, it started when it started. So
right,
yeah.
So how far through school did you get?
I finished school.
You finished?
Yeah, finished school. Did year 12, and at this time I was still living in Ocean Grove. But yeah, like musically through school, I kind of, like I said, I kind of made the decision to take the music thing seriously when I was around 10 or 11, and started practicing really seriously at that point. And then I also started playing with a bunch of local mates who were into kind of different music than I was checking out at the time. Like at that point, I'd kind of been really deep into the music that was around the house. And like I said, there was such a range, so it never felt like I was in need of something or so, like at a loss for what to listen to or what to kind of learn. There was always something to gravitate towards, but yeah, kind of around that same age, a bunch of other friends started playing instruments, and we started. It would have been like, actually probably like maybe like 02, 03 sort of time. And there are a bunch of like pivotal records for me at that time that kind of started sending me on a slightly different path musically, or a wider path, should I say. thanks to the guys I was hanging out with at school and all that, and that we're also playing. So that was like when the Volume 3 Slipknot record came out. I started getting into that pretty heavily. What else? It was Get Rich or Die Trying came out. So that kind of started me on the hip hop thing, which has served me pretty well in the last few years. They were massive records at the time. And then Dangerously in Love, Beyonce's first record, came out as well, which is another big one. And then there's absolutely a bunch that I'm forgetting about, because there may have been some Parkway Drive stuff as well, because I started getting into like a bunch of really heavy stuff, and that's kind of the music that my mates and I were playing. They come around to the house, I had like gear set up downstairs, and we'd play like Slipknot stuff, we'd play like System of a Down, like all the kind of the almost like cliche, like here's your introduction to metal sort of stuff. Right. But we'd kind of start doing that. But it definitely, like, I've always been the kind of guy that's, anytime I'm into something, I want to keep digging and keep digging. So yeah, and that's actually what I was going to mention earlier. Like, even though I was like those drummers that I was really into, it was great being into them, but the rest of the musicians that opened me up to was also huge, because if you're playing along to Weather Report records, you're not only playing along to Omar and Peter Erskine and Alex and all those guys, you're also playing along to Jarko, you're playing along with, Victor Bailey, you're playing on, and everything else outside of that. So, so you're playing with top tier musicians kind of unknowingly, really. And I've kind of tried to keep that, tried to keep that approach right up, up until this day. Always heavy researcher, and it's all enjoyable stuff to me. It's never like a chore. It's always like, it's what I love, it's what I'm into. So if I find a new drummer that I'm really, that I'm digging, I'll suss out everything they've been doing, and then from there that'll lead me on all different paths again. So from one person, it's like you almost create like a family tree of different projects and different things to check out and learn from. So to me, that's really exciting. And these days, obviously, with YouTube and things like that, it's like, it's endless. And it's still something I set aside time for, to make sure I'm not only staying current, but also deepening my knowledge of the past as well. Because stuff that I would read about in Modern Drummer and stuff years ago that I didn't have access to watching or listening to, now I can jump on Spotify and be like, oh, that's this record that he's talking about, or that's that show that they mentioned, or, so there's such a vast array of stuff to get my teeth into, which is super exciting, and something I really encourage if I'm ever doing any teaching or anything. More than anything these days is I encourage that, really get your listening together, dive into whatever it is that you love, and kind of chase that train or path wherever it takes you. More so than the fundamentals to playing drums are the fundamentals, and they've been the fundamentals for forever. And you can watch people in the 50s playing singles and doubles, and you go, well, there's people really haven't done it better, up until today, in what I mean, in terms of the basics of like the instrument. So in terms of, learning those core skills, but really getting your listening together and getting up on the history and seeing where things came from. And to me, that's a really enjoyable part of the process. And something, like I said, I still love doing today. So like I said, I was playing with a bunch of guys around school, and that was cool. And then once I got into high school, I started doing the like school bands and that sort of thing. So all of a sudden I was reading and playing charts and playing big band, playing Latin stuff, and it was still kind of interesting, because I always felt like I was not on my own, but I kind of felt like I was coming at it from a slightly different place to everyone else, because I think I was taking it so seriously, and so I had such an aggressive approach to my learning.
Do you think that was obvious to your mates?
Probably, yeah. I definitely would get we'd be on holidays and they'd be like, "Oh, you can kind of come hang out," and I'm like, "No, I'm practicing," and they're like, "What do you mean?
Damn,
practicing
man.
what for?"
On your holidays?
Like just that sort of stuff. And bless them, because
that's
it is what it is. And I think I've since come across people who have similar stories, but it would, on the other side, it probably would have been a bit weird, especially because at that time I didn't really have an outlet for what I was doing. So it wasn't like I was, training heaps for football, and then it was like I was going and playing like in something that everyone kind of could make sense of. It was like I was doing all this stuff, putting all these hours in, and everyone's like, "Where is this guy? What is he doing? Like, what is he?" So I kind of get it, but it's kind of funny in hindsight. But I definitely had to kind of stay on the path, and probably could have easily stepped off and started straying off. But But like I said, I was so focused on doing what I wanted to do and looking ahead to the future and making sure I was going to be kind of putting myself in a position where I could build the career and life that I had envisioned. So, and again, outside of, like I said, I was not just kind of practicing and studying music stuff or training stuff or whatever it was like. I was also reading like motivational books and like all that sort of stuff, just anything I could kind of take in to really just for extra energy, extra kind of inspiration, and to kind of keep putting in the time and keep putting the effort that I thought I needed to be putting in. So but having the experience at school and everything's definitely started to because obviously at that point my practicing and ability in that sense was kind of at a higher level than my experience. So it was nice to kind of be humbled in the sense of like, now you're playing with other musicians, now you're playing with music directors, now you're playing with people who are asking certain things of you, and now you're reading and now you're doing all this sort of stuff. So you kind of have to, it was no longer just me in a room. So I had to learn how to take everything that I was working on and learning and apply that to real world, you know. And I was fortunate to do that at a young age. So
that's interesting. So let me ask, when you started playing in bands and stuff, after having spent all that time in your room, how was your approach to time, and how was the musicians around you? How were they sort of indicating to you?
I think it was mostly positive feedback, to be honest with you.
So when you're practicing, you practice the metronomes and obviously playing along to records. And, and I guess you know, a lot of the old records, there's no clicks or anything like that.
No clicks, for sure. Yeah, something I would learn later. But but 100%. And to answer your question, all of the above. So I'd spend a lot of time practicing basics. I'd still love doing that. I don't get to do it as much these days, but just, you know, time and I have, you know, I need to put time into other areas essentially. And thankfully I did put enough time in at that point to where I can afford to put a little more time into other areas now, and I don't have to worry about, you know, some kind of those basic things. But not that they can't always improve, because they absolutely can, and I'm the first one to be super critical of myself. But but as a kid I'd spend a lot of time practicing basics, you know, technique, coordination things, independence things, reading, playing different styles, and again, some of this would come naturally in the sense of like I'd be trying to play along to a record and all of a sudden I couldn't play. My chops went up to what the record was calling for. So, you know, I couldn't play, there was a double on a foot that I couldn't do at that tempo. So I would go back and I'd turn the record off and I'd put the metronome on, and I'd just drill my foot at that sort of tempo sort of stuff. So I'd kind of find like I would go through the music, which I think is a cool thing.
If you're disciplined.
If you're disciplined, yeah, I guess.
Because, you know, if that's me and I go, I'm going to work on that double thing.
Yeah.
Oh, shit, that double thing sounds cool. Listen to something else. Put
that
record away. It would take me somewhere else.
Yeah, no, I was definitely like, fuck, I need to be able to do that. It was I wanted to get to the point where there's nothing I saw or heard that I couldn't do. Yeah. That was kind of my approach. Naively to some extent, but especially these days, man, there's some people doing some pretty incredible stuff. So, but that was at the time, that was my approach. So, and I think I was going to say before, I think it's kind of cool, and it's something I again try to kind of pass on to students in the sense of it gives you, in terms of the technical facility and chop building type exercises, it kind of gives you some context to them rather than saying, okay, I'm going to practice singles now, I'm going to practice doubles. If you can do it from a point of, I'm listening to this song that I really love, or this drummer that I really love, and they're doing X, Y, and Z, but I can't do them. It gives you a purpose and a reason to do it, rather than, my teacher's told me to practice singles. I don't really know why. And I think, and that's something I find, like when I'm talking to kids or whoever, it's the same sort of thing. It's like they lack. There's a contextual element to the learning that they're kind of missing out on. Through no fault of their own. It's just, I think maybe what happens when you're sent to music lessons or without like a really deep desire to be learning it. The other thing I notice is that people these days aren't necessarily listening to a lot of music, or the music they are listening to is not really connected to playing drums. So there's again a bit of a disconnect. And for me, like if that had been the case, I don't think I would have had anywhere near the capacity to practice like I was. Because for me, it was all mostly coming from, initially at least, coming from a place of I want to be able to do what I'm hearing.
Yep.
And if you're not hearing anything, then why are you going to be practicing? You know, so so that's one way I would approach practice, and then again I would pull in. This is where the kind of the boxing thing or the sport thing would come into play. I would pull in like, okay, I'm going to do X amount of rounds of 3-minute rounds of playing singles, and then I'm going to do 3-minute rounds of playing doubles, and I'm going to do the same thing around the kit. I'm going to do it left hand starting, I'm going to do it right hand starting, and little things like that. So at different times, like I would be waking up at 5:36 in the morning, and I'd go into our little room downstairs, and I'd play on a pad and like a practice kit and practice along to like Virgil in doing the power drumming workout or something like that, which was like a 40-minute thing, and I just do that, and that sort of stuff I love. It's just like super fundamental, super basic, super non-technical ideas, but to execute them really well.
It drills.
Just drills, yeah. And that's the sort of stuff I love, and that's the sort of stuff I loved in sport as well. I loved doing all those sort of things. So that's one aspect of playing, obviously. Then the other aspect is, or one of the other aspects is, time and learning how to play different sorts of grooves, and playing, like you said, playing along with a click. Definitely spent a bunch of time doing that, playing along to different loops, and as well as playing along to records without click, and so the practice was definitely quite broad, and then there's obviously a bunch of time trying to copy my favorite players, and and again back to the VHS tapes, like I would rewind and fast forward bits and like really like just drill little things over and over. I remember like there was an ad on this is before I even had like Steve Gadd's tape, but there was like that's an ad on one of them for Steve's video, and that was like him playing the Late in the Evening groove, like which is his famous like Mozambique thing, assimilation. And I remember like there was like a 15-20 second snippet of him playing this thing. You've probably seen the ad that I'm talking about, and that was like how I learned to play that groove, and this is where Dad kind of came in as well. Like, obviously, apart from showing me the basics and kind of being there as a guide throughout this whole process, he would kind of hear me doing something and maybe like pop his head into the practice room and be like, okay, this is cool, but maybe try it like this. And then all of a sudden it would kind of make sense. I remember something specifically, like there was a time where I was trying to play along to one of the songs on the first Toto record. And again, I would have been 12, 13 at the time. And there's like this break in one of the songs where Jeff does this big like 16th note triplet, fill around the toms, and I was like, playing along, and Dad was watching, and time comes to this fill. He probably doesn't even remember this. Definitely wouldn't remember this. And I just like started blazing and like played like just tried to play super fast around the toms, and he picked me up straight away and he's like, this is what it is. This is and just little things like that, and explain and all of a sudden that opens you up to. Again, to really defining what it is that you're hearing, and kind of leads to the transcription type thing. But I like the transcription. I didn't spend much time writing things out that I was hearing, but I spent so much time, and still do, spend a lot of time just listening to things. And then later on, once YouTube really kicked in, and like I said, I had the videos, but once YouTube kicked in, then it was like a whole world opened up that I was just like constantly like I'd download stuff, I'd watch it on the school bus, and then I'd come home and I'd try and work it out. And that's where I first started to see kind of the next generation of guys like Aaron Spears and like people like that, and that started opening up to a whole nother world of playing. So, but yes, but I've always been like quite analytical and almost to the point of obsession of like really wanting to figure things out and make sure what I'm hearing is, or what I'm doing is how I want it to be and how I was hearing it. So, attention to detail, I guess, is all that is. But yeah, I was doing most of this kind of just on my own. So there was obviously such a massive drive and passion for playing and the instrument at that point, and still is. But like I said, the practice these days is a little bit different, and a little bit more less kind of overall practice.
It's got to be
more
focused.
A bit more focused, and like I said, I have a few more balls to juggle these days. So, but yeah, like that whole process I loved. And still love, and yeah, man. I mean, there are so many other people that I'm not even mentioning, but that have been so influential and everything in the process. But like I said, like you take one thing and then you kind of family tree it off, and then you find all these other guys, and everyone from the main guys, Dennis, and all the people I mentioned before, and then other records my dad had was like Return to Forever, and like. So Lenny White and like people like that, and that led to the Chick Corea thing, and that led to Steve Gadd, and that led to Tom Brecklin and all the guys that Chick was working with, and so I mean, so many different Billy Cobham, and like I'm going to keep remembering people throughout this podcast, but
you don't need to name them all.
and then even like more obscure people later on were like guys that were kind of coming out of Africa as well that Zonal had been working with. It was like Paco Seri and like Mokta Samba and like cats like that were kind of doing more the world music thing, but again, like just a different approach to what I was hearing. And then, like I said, when the YouTube thing started kicking in, I don't remember what. I feel like the first thing I think I saw was maybe like, I remember when they did Live 8, and obviously I don't remember what year that was, but I feel like that was one of the first times I saw like the kind of modern approach to like the modern gospel approach to like pop music and shows like that. Because I remember Keith Harris being on it with the Black Eyed Peas, and there was also, I'm pretty sure Stevie was on the gig as well, or on the festival or the show. And Stevie was another one that I really listened to a lot growing up. His live record in Japan, Natural Wonder, was another one that was like on constant repeat in the car. And Jerry Brown's on that record, and that was amazing. Just in terms of like learning how to play ballads, learning how to play funk grooves, learning how to play with horns, like all that sort of stuff. Again, listening back to those records now, it's like there's so much depth to all of them, and same thing with all those guys I mentioned before, Picaro or like whoever it is, there's so much weight to their playing that like you could study it for a lifetime. So, but yeah, I think that gig was the first time I'd kind of seen that approach, and then from there it was like, boom, what the hell is this? Like, and I was pretty young, but I remember that really like stepping out at me, because I'm pretty sure, Keith was playing like how Keith plays, and kind of, like getting like all these gospel type feels and things. And I was like, I got to check more of this out. And that was kind of around the same time I feel as YouTube was happening, or like the internet was kind of becoming more of a thing. And that led me to Aaron Spears and to Teddy Campbell and to later to Rex Hardy and like all the guys like that. And then once I started checking out those guys a lot, and all the artists they were working with, Usher and Beyonce, Gerald Haywood was another big one at the time. There are so many. I'm going to forget names, but there are so many of those sort of guys as well.
Tony Royster Jr.
Tony Royster, absolutely. I saw Tony when I was pretty young. Again, I saw that video of him playing at the Modern Drummer Festival, and I was like, holy shit.
Yeah.
Because Tony's probably maybe 10 years older than me-ish, maybe. So kind of the next generation up. But it's interesting because those guys like Tony and Ron Bruner and Thomas Bridgen was another massive one. I remember first seeing Thomas and being absolutely blown away. And still am, and I've been fortunate enough to catch all these guys live now, which has been amazing. It's always very different seeing them in the room and seeing them, whether that's a small room or like on a big tour or whatever. Always try and make sure I go out and see any of these sort of people when they're playing. But what's interesting about those guys is that I kind of could relate to them because they had a lot of the same influences that I had. They were looking at Dennis, they were looking at Vinny, they were looking at Weckl and all those guys. And I could hear all that in their playing. But they also had the other thing, which I didn't have, which was the kind of coming from the gospel church scene. And so it was kind of this new wave of kind of taking the, really like, all-round fusion, kind of approach that, the Vinnies and guys like that had kind of pushed to the extreme. And then it was like adding this new flavor to it. So to me, it was like super exciting and super fresh. And again, something else that I started to really dive into. And again, not just like checking out their drum videos. I was like, which I think is kind of a little bit of to me, there's so much more to it, right? Like, like there was the videos that were floating around, but I would really make sure I would try and listen to the records that these guys were on. And that led me to, to the people that they were checking out as well. So, and with the gospel thing, that led to like, you hear Rex Hardy talk about Calvin Rogers, and then you go from Calvin Rogers playing with like Fred Hammond and Marvin Sapp to even the guys who were doing it before him, and checking out like the Hawkins family and like all those sort of records. So it was like you kind of again go through the history of each kind of genre, but not in like I want to know everything sort of way. It's just what was jumping out at me at the time, and was exciting to me. So at the same time as I had kind of this like heavy like Slipknot sort of thing happening, I was also starting to get into that sort of modern approach to the pop and R&B sort of shows, and again would like at the time, I'd go to JB and I'd buy all those DVDs. I'd buy Beyonce Live. I'd sit with Gerald Hayward, and I'd buy like Mary J. Blige with Rex, or I'd and make sure I was like across what was happening at the time. And again, obviously these days there's so much more so much more access to stuff. But and then I would add that into everything I was doing. So I would not only try and kind of understand the approach to the music that they were playing and how they were going at it, but I would also play along with it. Now I was playing along with straight concerts. So I was used to like, okay, here weirdly, like I'm hearing crowd noise. I'm hearing like, I'm playing along with tracks. I'm playing along with playback, but I'm also playing along with a live band. So it's like kind of all the stuff I've started doing professionally in the last, decade or so was already happening back then.
Playing along to Out of Time clapping.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
One
yeah,
and three.
Totally, man. All of it. Yeah. So as you can tell, I'm a pretty like voracious learner. And kind of always have been, and it's still something I love. And like I said, like when I moved to Sydney, that like I'd started doing a bunch of work in Melbourne, and like when I graduated high school, and playing a variety of gigs. Like I was playing with a couple of bands that were getting like some Triple J kind of play and stuff like that, kind of like indie rock stuff, which was cool. But around the same time, I'd started working with Ricki Lee as well, and she was based in Sydney.
Hang on a bit. So let's step back a little bit. Mm-hmm. So I heard that you won a up and coming drumming.
I did. Yeah, so I did.
Because the Ricki Lee thing came after that.
That came after that. Yeah. So
where what was that out of?
So the competition?
Yeah.
So the competition was a thing that I'm not sure if they still do it, but it was through Drum Tech. So Frank Boniola, who's obviously the head of Drum Tech out of Melbourne, had this competition called Australia's Best Up and Coming, and they had like a bunch of categories. Like there was I think it was the open category, and then there was like a couple of age categories below that. And Dad at that point had taken me to a couple of, because it was connected to the Ultimate Drummers Weekend at that point. So at that point, Dad had taken me to a few of the festivals, which were like a 2-3 day thing in Melbourne. And that's where I got to first see some of like my heroes at the time, right? So I got to see Weckl for the first time, and I got to see a bunch of guys that were coming out for these things. And then, so I went to those for a few years, and then once I graduated, but I'd never done any of the competitions, and I didn't really, it wasn't really on my radar at the time. And I, like I said, I wasn't really I was very much an outsider to all of this stuff, because I was living far away from what felt like everything at the time.
Yep.
But once I graduated, it was kind of like the year straight out of school. I was practicing a lot. I was kind of trying to figure out I was doing some teaching. I was trying to figure out how to kind of make everything work, take everything from where I was to the level that I wanted it to be. And at that point, like I said, I was playing some shows and doing, some original sort of bands and stuff like that. But also had, I'd spent all this time kind of checking out all the kind of the guys that were doing the big pop tours and all that sort of stuff. So that was also something that I definitely wanted to experience. But wasn't really sure how to make it happen, because it's a bit of a kind of ghost industry in a sense, and part of the music business, which is kind of spoken about, but also not really. You kind of, even though people are up there with the artist, it's like, it's just a bit of an enigma sort of side of the game. So, like I said, wasn't really sure how to make it happen, but I was super hungry. And so at that point, I hadn't really started like hitting people up yet, but the competition thing kind of came up, and I was pretty late to the game, really. Like, I think it was maybe like 4 or 5 weeks out from from submitting whatever I had to submit, that I really decided that I was going to give it a crack. And I did, man. Like, I think I had to play like and there was an On the Verge tune that I played. So that was like, which to me, that was like right up my alley. Like that On the Verge record, that's the whole story, but that On the Verge record was super important and special to me, and still is. A dear family friend of ours, Phil Tercio, is actually the keyboard player on that record. And funny story, he gave... my dad started at one point doing some like function gigs with Phil and a bunch of those guys, and the way Dad tells it is Phil kind of gave... He was like, oh man, check this CD out, sort of thing, and gave Dad and Dad's cousin, actually, he was playing with as well, this disc, and like they were driving home from the gig, like super tired, super late night, and they put this record on, and they're like, holy shit. Like, and it's like, obviously, like, for everyone who's heard that record, it's Virgil playing drums, and like, it's Virgil's band, basically, but but super
and that album's
progressive.
quite hard to find, isn't it?
Yeah. I don't think it's any on any streaming services or anything like that, but it's a little bit under the radar these days.
Yeah.
But for me, that was a massive record for me in terms of progressive music. Like, I'd been a fan of Virgil, obviously, massively up until that point, and had spent so much time, checking out his videos and like anything I could find of his. But that record at that point, I was pretty young. I would have been maybe 11 or 12 when I first heard it, and spent the next 20 years trying to figure out what the hell was going on there. But and still am. That record was massive. So that was one of the tunes on that was one of the things I had to play for the submission. I did that, and there was a bunch of like snare drum things I had to do and whatever. So to me, it was like very manageable to do. But I was pretty focused in that few weeks. So like I remember, again, I kind of treated it like I was going into a UFC fight or something. Like, I was getting up, I was running super early. I'd come home, I'd practice, I'd record whatever I need to record. And then, a few weeks later, I sent it all off, and then ended up, I don't know how long it took, but ended up getting a call from Frank, a little while later, and kind of almost being like, who are you?
Who the fuck are you?
which was really sweet.
That's
and
cool,
kind of funny.
Yeah.
But since then he's been, I haven't seen him or spoken to him for a long time actually, but he was super supportive. Once we ended up meeting and all that, he was really encouraging and supportive of me. And anyway, so I ended up, going through that process and ended up kind of winning the thing. And
so does it go from the submission?
So they
to
kind of,
and
I
then
think,
you do a performance?
however many people submit, and then which is just like a DVD recording at the time, and then they check those out, and then they kind of go through those. And I think they choose 3 or 4 people, and then you guys go in at the Ultimate Drummers Weekend, I think, and then do like a kind of a live thing, a performance or whatever. I think that's what happened. I actually don't remember exactly, but I'm pretty sure that was the process.
How wouldn't you remember that, though? You're fucking playing at the Ultimate Drummers Weekend, man.
It feels like so long ago, but I think that was the process, and then I'm pretty sure they choose on the day who the winner was, and I was fortunate enough to win. And it's actually funny because another mate of mine, Brendan Tan, was also in the competition, but I think he was in a different age category that day. But Brendan's like become a really good mate, and he's now playing with Tones and I, and he just did the New Year's Eve thing for ABC the other night, which was awesome. And so he's another phenomenal drummer. But there was like a bunch of us at the time that didn't really know each other, but in later years have kind of realised we were at this thing kind of together, which is funny. But so I ended up being fortunate enough to win that, and then from that came some like endorsement deals and things like that. And so that was my first taste of kind of navigating that side of the industry, and which was a little bit strange at the time because I wasn't touring. So the endorsement thing's kind of a strange topic as a musician, I feel, especially if you're not at a point where you're kind of needing tour support, because that's kind of the main thing. Obviously, like it's cool to get discounted gear and whatnot, but
you need the money to buy.
But you need the money to buy. But also,
gear in the first place.
But the main thing I think is really the tour support, meaning that whenever you're in a different city, you have access to they'll send you a kit or for reduced cost depending on the deal with the distributor and the particular backline company at the time. But in Australia anyway, that's kind of how it all rolls. But so it took me a little bit of time to kind of get my head around that, and it wasn't until really a few years later when I was actually touring that I kind of started to put the pieces together properly. So, but having said all that, it was obviously a great honor and really cool to kind of start to be involved with some of these companies and people at the time, or distributors of these companies. So, and then the following year, kind of as part of the prize, if you will. You get to kind of open the festival the next year. So I did that, and that was again a cool experience. I was pretty young. I was maybe 20 years old at the time. I think in between then, I'd also opened for Virgil on his Australian clinic tour. So when Virgil played, he did a clinic in Melbourne. I was like the opening act, which was a great, a pretty like full circle moment for me. At the time, I remember being very nervous, and I remember like warming up and kind of just sound checking and all that. And I remember Virgil standing off to the side, which I skipped.
I'm getting nervous.
Yeah, man, it was pretty
there.
funny. But he was also standing with, I'm pretty sure, if I remember correctly, Graham Morgan might have been there as well. Right. And what I did mention before is that during high school, even though I was living down in Ocean Grove, at one point I ended up getting into the College of the Arts High School in Melbourne. So I was taking the train up and like doing that whole thing for about 6 months. It didn't really work out for me at the time. It just wasn't kind of the right fit, and it was like a lot of living down. Like it was like a 2-hour trip each day. So it was a massive time investment, and I frankly at the time I just wasn't happy being there. And I didn't feel like I was getting to do what I really wanted to be doing. So it didn't really work out. But one of the main reasons I went initially was because I knew Graham was teaching there. So I obviously knew Graham was one of Virgil's teachers growing up. So that was kind of a cool thing. And I only had a handful of lessons with him there, to be honest. But it was it was probably the highlight of being there. And kind of he opened my eyes up to, kind of, not that I didn't know about them, but like really understanding, because I'd obviously been listening to what I'd been listening to, but really understanding odd groupings and polyrhythms and things like that. It was kind of Graham who really turned me onto that. So getting to spend those few lessons with him, however, there weren't many, but it was a handful of them, and seeing him just on a pad like perform all this stuff like flawlessly was also pretty exciting, pretty cool. So fast forward to the clinic thing. I'm pretty sure they were both standing there, and I was like, oh, this is a pretty hectic moment, but so that was the experience with Frank and drum tech, and like I said, Frank's been super supportive, and I think the following year he invited me to their it would have been maybe their 20th anniversary, like they had a bit of a dinner function sort of thing, and in Melbourne somewhere, and I remember Dave Weckl was there, and Thomas Lang was there, and then some other Aussies were there as well, like Gordo was there, and like a bunch of people, man. So getting to hang with Gordo for the first time was really cool, and I remember being in a conversation with Dave, Thomas, and Gordo, and and I'm like 20, 21 at this time, man. It was like super weird. Again, I've been watching all these guys for years, hearing about them for years. It was like kind of deer in a headlights sort of vibe, as you can imagine. But Gordo and Dave talking about like technique and like Freddie Gruber and like Dave's transition, and like it was a very surreal, even talking about it now, it's a very surreal moment, because I almost don't even really remember. I remember being there, but I don't even know if I said anything.
One of those moments, yeah.
One of those moments for sure. I actually bumped into Gordo the other week at a show in Adelaide, which was nice. I see him quite often at airports. That's where I see him these days, which is funny, or on flights. He's such a legend, man. He's such a lovely guy and amazing. I used to see him all the time playing on Idol as a kid.
I got to play his drums the other day.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's cool.
So, went and hung out at their house on Boxing Day.
Oh, amazing. I mean, he's got a studio and stuff out there as well.
I had a jam with Bill Risby. Do you know Bill Risby?
Yeah, not personally, but yeah.
Yeah, so, mate, one of the world-class
piano player. Absolutely.
And his young son is a up-and-coming bass player.
Oh,
He's
wow.
phenomenal.
Oh, hectic.
So
yeah, I remember hearing about Bill through maybe Paul Mason and like that crew.
Yeah. So they were jamming, and Jim Peace was playing drums.
Okay.
Because he was there.
Yeah, right.
And so I'm standing there watching Bill and Bill's son and Jim.
Yep.
And then Jim goes, he sort of says, "Is there any brushes anywhere?" And I went, "I'm sure there's some brushes in the studio somewhere."
Yeah.
So I went around the side room, and there's like a room there, and there's all sorts of stuff in this room, and there's piles of sticks. Mm-hmm. And in one pile there was one brush with the bent arm.
Yeah, right.
And then the other brush was in another pile with the bent brushes parts.
Yeah.
So I squared them all
brushes.
up. Yeah, I squared them. They're probably all in his bags.
Yeah.
But I found these two, and I took them to Jim, and Jim played, which is just magic watching him play.
Amazing, man.
And then he left the room, and I got up there to jam with him. So
fantastic.
Awesome.
Yeah, man. Legends. But Gordo's such a lovely guy.
Yep.
Such a massive Toto fan, which I love. We always, every time I see him, that always seems to come up. He turned me on to Lukather's book, which I ended up reading, which is really cool. Just hearing Gordo, he's such a funny storyteller, and
sure is.
He's a really good guy. Well, we actually haven't, since I've been living up here, like we haven't spent a bunch of time. It's kind of usually catching each other in passing and stuff like that, but anytime we hang out, it's always great fun, and he's such a lovely guy. But,
yep.
Yeah, man.
He just makes time for everybody, man.
Yeah, absolutely.
He's a special guy.
Yeah, for sure. I kind of forget what I was saying. What were we talking about before? I was talking about the drum tech thing. So the drum
thing, yep.
So from there, so that was all, all amazing experience, but kind of a little bit out of context because it was like a kind of a separate thing to any of the work I was doing. Like I'd been fortunate to start doing a bunch of gigs like around town outside of the original thing. I'd started working, kind of doing the cover and type of thing with Mark Amato was like the first guy that called me to do that, who's like a really renowned keyboard player, MD, based out of Melbourne. Again, that was a connection through Dad. He'd done some gigs with Mark, and Mark had kind of been a bit of a mentor to me in those few years. So, he'd take me to gigs, and I remember seeing Mark, like, he got my sister and I tickets to go see, because he was doing the support for Whitney Houston, which was her last tour out here. The tour, unfortunately, where her voice wasn't quite there, and she was getting a bit of bad publicity, but for me, it was like an amazing experience seeing like Mark up on that stage and seeing that gig, because that was kind of early on when just before maybe I could drive, and like I said, living far away, I wasn't getting a chance to see a heap of stuff, so that was really special to me. And then from there, I started trying to go to everything I could, like I said. So when Usher would come out, I'd go. When Rihanna would come out, I'd go. So I was like making sure getting to see like all those big sort of like pop R&B acts at the time, kind of that I was really heavily checking out, as well as, like I said, doing the original thing, and then did this thing with Drum Tech and Frank, and was really fortunate to end up winning and get out of it what I did. And then from there, I kind of I went and spent a little bit of time in Los Angeles and had some lessons over there, and kind of hung out for a couple of months, and which was really nice. It was like my first time living alone, essentially, and spent a bunch of time even though I was right in LA, I spent a bunch of time on my own, which was nice. To kind of like a bit of a break from like what I felt like was like a 10-year run of kind of pretty hard work and a lot of time and investment. And so it was almost like just a bit of a breather, in a sense, as well as getting to check out a bunch of things in person and go to jams where, Gordon Campbell was hanging out, and like I remember being at one and Mike Mitchell was playing, and like I remember seeing Matt Gasker around, and like all these guys. It was like, okay, it was like there was a bit of a buzz happening, and it was cool to be around that, And I came back from there, kind of with every intention of going back. However, obviously with the US, there's, getting a visa for the States as just a like freelance guy is pretty difficult, next to impossible, really, unless someone over there is kind of sponsoring you, or you're going over with an artist. So it was almost like in the meantime, I was like, how am I going to make this happen? So I started basically putting, finding like, going online and finding like management companies and like different things, and just like sending out emails and like, just like, sometimes I'd cold call, and sometimes I, just like trying to hustle things together, because I felt like, again, at that point I was so far away from everything that I really wanted to somehow kind of break in, and one of the people that I managed to get through to was Ricki Lee's partner, and manager, and we started talking, and he was like, yep, send me something through, and I did, and then I get a call like from like Ricki, and she's like, man, like what is this? This is amazing. Like, she was so stoked. And it's kind of funny in hindsight in terms of quality, because things have stepped up so much in these 10 years, but this was literally me like on an electronic kit playing along, probably live, like nothing's going through like a DAW or anything like that. Everything's playing like on the pads, like probably through an amp with like the music laid over the top. So it's like pretty raw, but obviously they saw something that they dug and probably liked the fact that I was quite hungry for it and all of that. So next thing I know, I'm like at a bar with them in Melbourne discussing like things that they want to do and things that are coming up. And I'd actually gone to see the show before this happened. So she was touring in Melbourne, and I went and caught the show, and I think that's how the timeline worked. And then the first thing we did was I then found myself a few months later like on Sunrise in Sydney, and again I was living still where I was living, and they were graciously flying me up and down for rehearsals or for gigs. And so it went from like a couple of TV things, then we did like a big New Year's thing on the harbour in like 2012 to 13, and then she was kind of in the middle of a tour at that point, but was making some changes with her lineup. Again, all this was like oblivious to me at the time. I was just kind of, I didn't really have any idea of anything. I was just like, they would like we want you, and I was like, cool, let's do it. So jumped on some of those shows, and then we have something coming up this week. So this is like, it's been like a 10, 12 year period now, on and off of like, and working together, which is kind of rare. I've found, working with other people. So that's cool.
In my opinion, Ricki Lee is one of the greatest voices that ever come out of Australia.
Yeah, she's a phenomenal singer,
and
for sure.
why she's not more of a global star. This is my opinion.
Yeah.
And maybe not.
Yeah, I mean, those sort of metrics are always super interesting, and I've learned that you can kind of never pick it. Songs that you think will be really big aren't big, and then songs that you kind of go, oh, that's interesting, that's big, like everyone loves. It's like, and I can imagine trying to like build a career in that sort of sense as a pop star is such a. There's so many factors, so many variables, but to her credit, she's been able to maintain and grow her career from pretty humble beginnings, and she, again, her and her partner Rich have been so supportive of me and so like welcoming and everything right from the get go. Like when I was first coming up here, I'd stay at their place. They were living in Darlinghurst at the time, just off Oxford Street. So I was like, it was a whole new world for me. So at that point, like any of the original stuff I was doing, I'd never toured it, I'd never travelled it. So it was like my first taste of kind of touring and all that. So. And learnt a lot, and then first time playing along with the clique, first time playing along to playback and tracks and cues and all that sort of stuff. So it was Did
you feel you were prepped for that though, from all the work that you done?
I think so, yeah. I was so hungry to jump in, and if anything, it was like I wish there was more shows.
Yeah, okay.
And I remember her saying at one point, she's like, man, I wish we were doing more. I'm like, that's cool. But because I was so raring to go, and then eventually, like a year or so later, I ended up moving up here. Knowing that that gig was happening, not that it was like enough to be my full-time job by any stretch, but I knew it was there and I knew they were here, and then slowly from there I drove up here in my car, didn't even bring a kit because I at that point I'd switched. I used to when I first started with the endorsement thing, I was playing Gretsch, and then that was just part of it, which was amazing. I was just playing, that was part of the competition. Okay. And then ended up switching to DW once I realized that kind of understood the backline thing, and especially everything out here, I was like, maybe I need something that's going to be more prevalent and like accessible, So again, just my thoughts at the time. So ended up switching to DW, and so I drove up here without a kit and ended up like buying one and getting that shipped like to Sydney, and then started once I got here, started very humbly, did the $150 gigs, did like did stuff for free, did like any and everything I could. And a mate of mine, actually Ricky's bass player, was the guy that first took me to the Monday Jam. He was still living here at the time. He lives in Adelaide now, but he had a bunch of mates kind of like that were doing the jam. So he took me along to that, and that was kind of my gateway into some of the other stuff around town. That's where I met Paul. That's where I met Noel, and that's where I met Steve Lamonte. Like all that crew I met pretty early on when I moved up here. And again, it was nice to just start connecting with other musicians and on a more regular basis, And then started, the network, I guess, started to kind of grow, and I started getting little calls for things, and can you sub here? Can you jump in here? And one of the other really important guys who's become one of my best mates now that I met was Yanya. He really early on, I met him in King's Cross at a jam. I'm pretty sure actually Kevin was playing drums at that gig. So I started to meet that crew, the Martinez boys, all of that. But Yanya was I'm pretty sure he drove me home that night, and he was has been super supportive of me ever since we met.
He's pretty special like that.
Oh man, absolutely. And I know he's been my story is probably very similar to a lot of people's stories in that sense. But yeah, we've become super close, and he's had me. I'm really thankful that he's had me sub for him on a bunch of shows over the years, and. Whether it's with Tani or Joy, Jared James, who am I forgetting?
I was going to ask about the Joy, because I did see on your socials that you played with Joy and Mark.
Yeah.
So
Mark, another one I love.
Yeah, and because I knew Yanya played with Joy.
For sure, yeah.
So
the Joy thing was funny. That was... so the Joy thing happened, I think in 2017 was the first show. So Jan got the call... A bunch of our other mates had been working with Liv at Joy at that point. But again, kind of like T, I don't think she'd done shows for a while, so she kind of had a fresh start. And I'm not sure how Yanya got the call, but he got the call to MD her new set, basically. Yep. And she had a tour coming up supporting Kaylani, who's like a big R&B artist from the States. And she was coming out to here to do a run. And I think, so on that run, Yanya was... he was going to be out with Tandy, so they were, I think, doing I forget what tour they were doing. They were pretty big shows. I think they were doing fuck, no, I can't remember. Because I just remember that at one point us being all in the same city and going out for dinner. And the first time I tried, like, tried pancakes and, like, maple syrup and bacon. I did, like, that whole thing, the Canadian breakfast thing. Right. Yanya's like, you've not tried this? I'm like, I have definitely not. And I probably haven't had it since, but it was a fun night. So that was, I just remember that night. And it was, but yeah, so I can't remember exactly why Boston couldn't do it, but there was obviously some clashes to some, in some way. So he asked me if I would be keen to do it. And I said, definitely. And yeah, really grew to love Liv's music. Like, it's some of my favorite music I've played, I think. So we did that tour, and then over the years I've kind of jumped in on a bunch of other shows for her, and we've kind of like swapped back and forth. I'm pretty sure maybe Dom has jumped in as well. And I think, I think there's been a few, like, just a bunch of guys that Boston will call if he can't make it.
Yep.
And yeah, I'm just, stoked that I'm on that list. But even outside of the music stuff, man, like, he and I've spent a lot of time hanging out, and if I've been down, he's absolutely been someone who's there for me, and kind of, persevered, even if I'm, like, crawling into my I'm a bit of a hermit sometimes, and he's, like, very much one to pull me out of that space. So he's definitely been that mate for me, and I, super, super grateful for that. And anytime he calls for anything or needs anything, I'm always, hoping I can help him out, whether it benefits me or not. It's just one of those things. So, and it's nice having those relationships, man. Especially, it's cool when it crosses over with work, but I think it's, those sort of relationships and friendships are, go far beyond, like, gigs and shows and any of that sort of stuff, So, they're the sort of mates that you kind of hang out with at 1 a.m, eating Thai food or getting a juice or something, it's that sort of nice stuff, have stupid jokes with and all that good stuff. So, and again, he's someone who's been in there and kind of done it all. So, I've learned a lot. I learned a lot from him, kind of even just being around him. And, he kind of got me into running playback and, like, all that sort of stuff. So from some of those skills that he's opened me up to, I've been able to take those and then I ended up MDing Ricki and, like, MDing a few other things. And so I've kind of been able to apply a bunch of those things that he kind of opened me up to other things. So, yeah, man, he's a legend. And as we all know, but yeah, so he was one of the guys I met, like, early on, and that was super supportive, as well as Kevin, as well as Steve, as well as, all these guys, man, that were just super warm and open with me, and right from the beginning, which was really lovely to experience, and I'm super grateful for. And the other thing, I mean, those guys were all kind of the next step up for me in terms of, like, professional work, but also, like, age-wise, they're a little bit older than me, so to varying degrees. But then I started meeting a bunch of guys my own age who were all younger that were also, like, phenomenal drummers, and, have also become some of my really, really good mates. Guys like Tully and Dom, and, guys like that, who I think are, amazing players and awesome guys. And, yeah, man, I mean, we have so much talent here. It's crazy. It's crazy. Not even just in Sydney, in Australia. Like, it's wild. Tully, and Tully's definitely Tully's one of my favorite players. Tully and I lived together for a little while. Back in, like, 2015 or so. I think it was like 6 months or a year or so. And he was such a funny guy.
In Urco?
Not in Urco.
Oh,
this
right,
was
okay.
Before he moved out there. We were in Redfern. Yeah, full, like, bars on the window vibe. Full, like, he used to have, like, a Rabbitohs flag in his window.
Yeah.
So yeah, he's such a he's a legend, and I love him. And he's another one, man. Like, anytime he puts it, like, a record comes out that he's on, I'm the first one to jump in and check it out. Anytime he's doing a show that I can make, I'll always go. Like, and he's phenomenal.
Are you going to go to the Daniel March show?
Hopefully, yeah. I know that, like, Boston's on that, and, like, a bunch of Adam Ventura. I just saw the ad come through the other day. But yeah, if I'm around, for sure, man. But yeah, like, Tully's, and he's playing with, like Ruben from Peking Dark, like, on his solo stuff, like, is incredible, and totally different to what people kind of expect from Tull, as well as his stuff with, like, Godtet and Hacker and all those projects, man. So he's someone who I will, in terms of records and people that I listen to from around here, like, he's definitely one for sure. And I tell him all the time, and he hates it, but he's not real good with compliments. But I don't know if any of us are. But anytime he puts up something, I'm like, fuck, man, like, amazing. Yeah, he just sends me something stupid back. But yeah, man, there are a bunch of other guys from Australia that, like, records that I really, one guy actually that I should mention is Mitch Clues, who's a guitarist mate of mine who kind of, like I said, up until like my listening had been pretty broad, and then when I moved here, like I'd been pretty deep into like the pop R&B thing, like I said, kind of trying to get that together, and then I started working with Ricki, so that was like really feeding into that. And then when I moved here, I started doing a little bit more of that sort of stuff with some different artists. I started subbing for another mate of mine, Dave Jenkins, and his partner at the time, Marcus, were kind of running a kind of like an MD company, so they were pulling musicians together for work for different label artists and things like that. And I started subbing in on some of those shows. And one guy that I met doing one of those shows, I remember this very vividly. This is not when I first met Mitch, but Mitch and I started doing, I think we were working with like Samantha Jade and like Taylor Henderson and a few people like that. And Mitch was like such a phenomenal musician and guitarist and just a guy, and has become one of my best mates. But he kind of, at that point, like I said, my listening had been what it had been. But I remember being at Movie World with Mitch, and we were doing a show there and sitting backstage, or like in some whatever room we were in, and Mitch was kind of like telling me about some stuff he was listening to, or mates of his that were doing some different stuff, and I was like, cool man, like let's have a listen. And he pulled out two artists. He pulled out, which are very much in the same world. He pulled out Pliny, and he pulled out the Helix Nebula. Now, for anyone who doesn't know, like those guys have all become like kind of very household names in the kind of progressive instrumental world, not only in Australia but worldwide. Like they kind of, along with like Animals as leaders and like bands like that, Pliny's name especially is like right up there with all those guys, and I remember, and this was before like I think his first like proper record had come out, so he maybe only had singles, because this would have been like 2015, maybe early 2016, so it was right before Handmade dropped. And Mitch was like, man, check this out. And I remember like he played me like he first played with the Helix Nebula, and which is his mate Simon Grove, who he used to live with, and they've been mates for years, but he now plays bass with Pliny.
Yeah.
But he that was his band with Jake Hassemlow, Stephen Taranto, and another mate of theirs, Nick, who was playing drums, and who's all like top tier, phenomenal like progressive musicians. So this was like, and then he obviously played me some of the Pliny stuff as well, and I'm like, man, what is all this stuff? Like it was like a double take moment of like, this is unreal. Like I felt like, where have I been, sort of thing. And then quickly kind of like turn the corner again to, again, like I said, I've been listening to a bunch of heavy stuff, but apart from like the On the Verge stuff, I'd kind of not really progressed in terms of my progressive music listening. So I think I'd become aware of, I'd definitely been, like I said, because when I was in the States, I'd seen Gasker like mat around, and I was aware of people like that, but hadn't done like the deep dive into those records at that time. So Mitch was kind of like heavily, solely responsible for me kind of taking that route and really kind of reshifting and opening that world up to me again. So and then fast forward, so that would have been 2015 or so, and then fast forward 7-8 years later, and we're all touring together. So we were playing. Mitch called me to do when Stephen Taranto was putting his solo project together for the two shows. Mitch called me and was like, "Man, are you interested in doing this?" And I was like, I was like equal parts terrified and excited, because I don't know if you've checked out any of that music, man, but it's like it's the most complicated music that I've ever had to play live, at least. Like I've played some pretty hefty stuff like at home, and that's fine, but playing it like to an audience that are paying to be there is like a very different level. So Mitch called me for that, and we over the next however long, we would get together every now and then and rehearse, and then I ended up obviously meeting Steve-O, and he's actually one of the guys I mentioned earlier that I was doing some prep for. He's working on some new music at the moment.
Yep.
We're talking about tracking some drums and stuff for it. So he sent me some demos, and because I've never recorded with him, so. Okay. We've done 2 tours now. The first one we did was with Pliny, opening. So myself, Mitch, and Steve-O did an East Coast run for that, and which was amazing, man. Like that record to me, we did the Impulse Voices tour. This was last year? Maybe last year. I think it was last year,
so with Chris on drums and not Troy. Yeah.
With Chris on drums, not Troy. Yeah. However, at this point, I absolutely will mention Troy. I'd seen. So this would have, like I said, when Mitch turned me onto all this, it was a quick oh shit, I got to catch up here, and I really dove in. So I dove deep into Animals, deep into checked out that Helix record, and anytime I hear that record now, it's still like, what planet where did they pull that stuff from? I'm not sure, but so checked out all that stuff, and then I think the next time Animals came out, I went to the gig, and they were playing the Metro. Pliny was supporting. Troy was on that show, and I think at that point I'd probably seen Troy's videos on YouTube.
Yep.
I must have, because he was like one of the guys. Like there was Troy, Matt Maguire, like who's also out of Queensland, who now plays with Chainsmokers. Both like incredible drummers, and they've both like built these hectic, awesome careers. Troy, I've never met Matt. Troy, I don't even know if I've actually, no, I did meet Troy. I met Troy at that gig, but we've never like hung out properly. But we've spoken a bunch online over the years, and he's actually subbed for me for a pop thing at one point in Queensland. So we've kind of become mates just through that, and obviously a bunch of mutual friends. But yeah, so Troy was on that show with Pliny, and man, he's such a phenomenal player. Like. Yeah, and has obviously since gone on to do intervals and and then recently I saw him play with Architects at the Horden, and that was something else, man. Like he's such a powerhouse, and again I know he's like a massive fan of like a lot of the people I am. So again, it's really cool to see how we all kind of play differently, but we're all kind of coming from a similar approach. And and the other band that which kind of turned me on to was Carnival. That was so Steve Jard. So that was like yeah, man. So it was it's a whole other world. Actually, at that point, like before I moved to Sydney, I'd done kind of an obscure progressive record. That was like it was the guy I was working with he was a legend, man, and great player. He was really into Zappa, so it was more kind of in that world. But like we were playing in like 21, like all these like hectic time signatures and everything. And I remember tracking that in a couple of, maybe even in a day or a couple of days, and we did like 6 or 7 songs. Sounds weird in retrospect because it sounds like not a lot of time, but and I hadn't had much studio experience at that point, but and like I said, I wasn't really in that world, but I was definitely like playing a lot of my Virgil stuff on that record. But yeah, so fast forward so I saw Animals, saw Matt Lab, saw Troy, saw Pliny, saw the whole thing, and then anytime Pliny would play synths, I would try and catch the gig, and then obviously and then Chris started doing the gig, and man, like Chris and I have become mates now, and obviously we toured together, and yes, and Chris is like another phenomenal player.
Sure is.
The parts he comes up with, and his approach to things, and like I said, that Impulse Voices record, and as soon as I listened to it, I fucking messaged or as soon as it was released, I messaged the Voice straight away, and I was like, guys, this is phenomenal. Like I know this sounds shit coming from a mate, like it sounds cheesy, but like this is like an amazing record, and like there are a bunch of moments on that thing that to me is still like magic, and yeah, like the first track alone is just like wow, like out of this world to me anyway. They'll probably laugh at me saying that, but that's fine. I'll cop that. I'll cop it from the boys. That's all good. So I've seen the show a bunch of times with Chris, and actually when I was in the States, I went there. Do you know Eric Fortaleza, bass player? So he was another really important guy that I met up here. Became super tight. Bass player mate of mine. He now lives in Nashville. So he moved there a couple of years ago. He was playing with like a big country artist over there, and now he's kind of running his own business and running his own like jam session, like open songwriter night, and like it's doing amazing things over there. MDing, he's MDing like the winner of American Idol, and like he's doing all this cool stuff. But he and I went to the States in like 2019 for like a couple of weeks. I think it was a couple of weeks. We went to like the NAMM show and hung out and a bunch of things, and went and saw Pliny in Anaheim, and that's where I met Stephen Taranto. So again, we'd been chatting at that point, and we'd already kind of decided to work together. Mitch had recommended me, but that's where I first met Steve-O, and then like I said, that led to like getting together, playing together, rehearsing together. I kind of put the show together in terms of like the playback stuff, which was more of like a thing for me of here's a great way to learn the music, because I had to really go through and like figure out time signatures and figure out groupings and figure out, so I like really mapped it out quite extensively. And that was an incredible learning process, man. And again, then having to do it live was like, was another big learning experience, especially playing in front of like your mates and it's a different crowd. It's a different crowd to playing a pop show or playing, any like the other sort of stuff I've done.
You've got people there standing with arms crossed.
Yeah, and it's
what the fuck's he doing?
Yeah, totally. And it's not even like
not even tapping their feet, right?
It's not even necessarily in a judgmental way, but it's a lot of the people that come to those things are like, heavyweight, musicians, so they know what's going on, and they know when something's not happening, and there were definitely a few moments where things weren't happening, but that's all right. I'll cop that. But like I said, it was a great learning experience, and we did a couple of tours. The second one we did was with Ivanya, who's also another amazing guitarist based in Sydney, and so we did a run with him as well.
What's his name, sorry?
James Ivanya.
Okay.
So he's he's a really, again, incredible guitarist, incredible writer. The music's, it's like, I don't even know how to describe it, but super complicated, super just crazy, but beautiful stuff, So that tour was a lot of fun as well. And that's led to so hopefully getting to record with Steve and actually kind of document some of the stuff, which will be a different experience again, and also very challenging. So I'm trying to get in as early as I can to spend, because I got a little bit more time now at the moment I'm not traveling as much, to kind of check out other things and dig my teeth into stuff. So now that I've got some time, I'll really want to make sure I'm across it until he calls and he's like, "Oh, recording next week." I'm like, "Fuck." I don't want it to be that sort of situation. So,
right.
So that whole world that kind of really started with Mitch has been awesome to kind of dive into. And Mitch is into a whole heap of stuff as well, and we've done a bunch of different things together over the years in different kind of worlds. But he was the one that kind of turned me on to the more modern progressive thing, and I've since become a massive fan of all those guys, Intervals and Plenty and and Periphery and all those sort of groups. Man, I love the music, and fortunate now to kind of be mates with some of the guys in there as well. So and I've seen it and made sure, and even before any of meeting him or anything, I was making sure I was going and checking out the shows, and I went and saw Intervals, and when it's anytime I get a chance to see something, I will. Like I said, it's so nice to be around people that you really hold up in high esteem and respect, and know are on top of really at the top of their game. So anytime I can, and in whatever genre really, I'll always try and do that, and whether the gig's a small thing or an arena thing or whatever it is, I'll always try and go and hang and I usually don't. People don't even usually know I'm there until I'll leave and I'll post something, and they're like, "Oh shit, you're here." I'm like, "Yeah, man, I just just came in, just check it out."
Yeah, that's cool.
Because it's at shows sometimes it's you don't want to be the guy that's "Oh, can we hang out afterwards?" And it's always I try not to be that guy, which is and I totally full respect to you if that's kind of your thing. But for me, I try to. It's kind of my chance to be a little bit more subtle and under the radar, and I just go enjoy the gig, and then I'll just let them know later that I thought it was mad or whatever. If sometimes not even that, I'll just kind of let them do their thing. But there's so much stuff. So I've really made an effort the last few years to check out as much as I can, which has been awesome. There's been a few that I've missed, unfortunately, but just if I'm away or something.
It's always the way.
Yeah, for sure.
So when you're in these sort of quieter times, do you pull the odd corporate gig and?
Yeah, I mean, man, when I was saying, I did any and everything when I first moved to town. Literally any and everything. Any gig I was offered, it was kind of a yes,
No, I mean like these days.
But these days, much less.
Yeah.
And definitely by design. Again,
that's what I thought.
I've definitely clarified kind of the space that I want to be working in, and as much as the money sometimes from those things can be helpful, in quieter times, I think, I mean, the reality is that I don't actually get a lot of offers for it these days. New Year's, I didn't get an offer for any of that sort of stuff, whereas in previous years, like I said, even last year I had a couple, and in previous years, but this year I didn't even get an offer for that. So, which is to me, it's fine. I'm kind of, I feel like anyone's always I could probably have more money, depending on what, regardless of what level you're at, it's all relative. So, but yeah, in terms of and sometimes some of those gigs are fun, the last kind of cover thing I think I did in terms of a band thing. Sometimes I do a thing where it's just me playing at a club with a DJ. Yeah. Which is cool, because I feel like it's just a 3-hour practice session.
Okay. Yeah.
And it's just a different thing, and it's so if I'm available and I'm in town, I'll jump on that. Mate of mine, Garrett, kind of calls me to do a bunch of that stuff, which is really nice of him.
Shout out to Garrett.
Yeah, totally, man. Another up and coming dude.
Yep.
So thankful for him for that. but I think the last band thing I did was actually cool. We did G Flips, Aria after party.
Oh, did you?
So it was
right
at, like downstairs at the Lansdowne. And it was like a sick band, man. It was like myself, Yanya was playing percussion, Dre was singing, Mark Maloof was playing guitar, Phoenix was playing keys, and Adam Ventura was playing bass. So anytime I get to play with those guys, it's always mad.
That's heavy.
And playing with a percussionist as well, which I should also mention, is something I don't get to do very often, but I love, man. And I grew up, like, Dad played congas a little bit as well, and so we always had some congas in the house. And like I said, I mentioned Alex Acuna earlier. He was like a guy that, you know, he obviously does both incredibly well, and he was someone like on, you know, his work with Weather Report. I loved, you know, listening to Heavy Weather. That was actually one record I remember specifically, kind of at the turning point of like me deciding. There were two. There was that record and 10 Sumner's Tales, the Sting record, which was kind of a turning point for me. Yeah, man. I was heard that one once or twice.
Yeah.
Those two records were like, I feel like at the time, and maybe Toto 4, were those at the time were things that I was almost like very influential in me deciding to take this route, I feel. And then so obviously the Heavy Weather record with Alex, and then it was weird, like, would have been maybe time frame maybe 10 years later, I was like sitting in his living room in Los Angeles because I went and had a lesson with him, and I could see like the Grammy for Heavy Weather. It was like on his like above his fireplace, and I'm like, this is such a weird moment.
You reckon that is that there to sort of scare people? Or?
I don't. I mean, he couldn't have been nicer, man. He was such a lovely guy, and that whole experience was, and like I said earlier about kind of having moments of, you know, in the last few years of getting to hang with people that you looked up to. That was a big one because, you know, obviously I'd grown up watching him, grown up listening to him, and then it was there, like, he's teach me like Latin stuff, and I say trying because I was a little bit I'd been in LA for maybe like a month and hadn't been practicing or anything, so I felt like out of shape. Sorry, people were like, what is this guy doing? But it was an incredible experience, you know, and I think anytime you can be around people who are amazing at what they do, for me, is like I just try and soak it up like a sponge, you know, and hopefully some of it kind of sticks, and even if it's not anything literal playing wise or whatever, it's just like, welcome back to the airport. It's just there's nothing, and as you know, there's nothing like, you can watch stuff, you can listen to stuff, but there's nothing like being in the same room and hearing like the bass drum hit your chest, or hearing like, or watching someone like watching their snare drum, watching their hi-hat foot, or like, there's nothing that can replace that sort of like being that close, you know. And you hear guys talking about the same experience of you know, of seeing Buddy or seeing like whoever, you know, when they were around in that sort of era. And it's like the same sort of thing. Like, we can watch it and there's so much access to it now, and we can get pretty close, but it's not the same as like being in a sweaty club, you know, with low ceilings in the 50s, hearing Buddy like do his thing. Like, that would have, like, if I could go somewhere, that I'd check that out for sure. Definitely transport me back there. And that's why, like I said, I try to get as much of that in now as possible, you know. And there's always guys to check out, you know, known, unknown, local, international, like whoever it is, there's always something cool happening. I think that's what's cool about the internet as well. It's really opened up the world or brought the world closer, should I say, and really shone light on just how many amazing musicians and people there are doing their thing. So it's always something to learn, always something to you know, to brush up on or to improve, and to me that's exciting, you know.
So you're in the pop hip hop space.
Yeah.
You're in the prog. We call it prog, I suppose.
Yeah.
Guitar prog.
Yeah,
I guess that's what you call it. What?
Yeah.
Math metal. That's what Chris told me it's called.
Yeah. Right.
Math metal.
I mean, Chris would know, so let's call it that.
Yep.
Yeah, for sure.
Could you picture yourself in the Latin space?
I mean, I feel like, I haven't had a heap of, through school bands, we played a bunch of Latin charts and stuff like that. And I played like Latin things here and there, but I've never done like, I think that's maybe one of the genres that's, I really love the music. I love listening to like a good, Latin percussionist, to me is like incredible. Like, you know, Manolo Madrena or like Pedrito Martinez or like guys like that. And you just like, I sit there and I'm going, fuck, like, that's just, to me, there's something about it. Someone who can, and anytime, and like even playing, like I was mentioning before about playing with Young the other night, playing percussion, it was like, and he can play, like playing congas and all the sounds there, and it's like, oh man, this is incredible. Like, I don't get to do this very often. But as far as like me doing like full Latin gigs, I don't know if that's ever a call that'll come, but I've definitely like spent a bunch of time listening to the music, and I'd like, again, growing up, I was listening to, I'd do the Michelle Camilo. So I remember doing Michelle Camilo tunes in high school, in the school bands, and actually playing some Latin percussion stuff in that. Do you know Gareth Thompson? He's a Melbourne guy. He and I went to high school. He's a couple years older than me, but he some of the bands I was playing in, he was the drummer, and I was playing some percussion, and he, like, again, being a bit older, and he's now doing awesome stuff, man. He's like producing and mixing, and he was in a band called Sex on Toast, and he's done like a bunch of really cool stuff. So it's nice. It seems weird because we both feel like we come from kind of nowhere. But he's someone who's gone on to do some really cool stuff, and he was living in Vietnam for a while working, and we caught up like not that long ago. I feel like it was probably a while ago now, but yeah, and it was really nice. Like, we hadn't hung out, like, we'd been chatting, but hadn't hung out properly in years. So it was nice to kind of touch base again. And but yeah, I remember like playing some Michelle Camilo stuff, and he was like playing drums, and like I was playing some percussion stuff. And I'm not a Latin percussionist. Like, I've spent a bunch of time trying to learn like basic conga stuff at home. Dad was always like, it's probably a good idea if you can, do some basic stuff if it ever comes up in kind of a session context or whatever. So I understand. I definitely know what it should sound like. Yeah. But I think I would still have to put in a bunch of time to kind of feel comfortable playing like the basic stuff. I can kind of get through it, but it's not like Yanya or some of the other guys around town who really know how to do it. So, but like I said, I just love listening to the music, and have learned a lot watching Antonio Sanchez and Horatio Hernandez and like guys like that. And again, even like get back to the Zonal and Weather Report thing, that's very like world music influenced. And but yeah, I mean, if the Latin call comes, I probably wouldn't say no. Yeah. But I would probably also do a deep dive into that world for a little bit of a time before jumping in. But yeah, we'll see. Yeah. But yeah, I guess the pop thing has been pretty prevalent for me in the last few years, and then the hip hop thing as well. Like, that kind of started, I guess, with, again, like I said, the Get Rich or Die Trying 50 Cent record was like something I was really into when it came out, and then that led me into, like, I love hip hop now. Like, it led me down to, Biggie, to Pac, to Jay-Z, and like I'm a massive fan of like all that sort of music. 90s, I think 90s hip hop especially, even though Get Rich was like early 2000s, but the 90s hip hop thing, especially like the New York thing, is like something I'm really into. And then that eventually I got a call from a mate of mine, Carl, who was MDing Thunders at the time. He and I worked together with Tim and Matic back again with Jarrell back in the day, and again I hadn't seen Carl for years. Carl Dimmetega, and I hadn't seen him for years. And then I got a call randomly to see if I was available to jump on this Thundamentals festival that they were doing, Big Pineapple in Queensland, and I happened to be free, and I was like, absolutely, man. So, but it was like pretty last minute. I'm pretty sure it was the week of, and like, I think I got the call on like a Tuesday. I was probably leaving on the Friday or Saturday, and probably didn't get the music till like Wednesday or Thursday. And then it's just like, and again, they just sent me like a bunch of. That's an interesting gig actually. That's in the setup wise, like there's no click on that gig, but we're playing the tracks. So okay. So it took, and then for that first show we did not rehearse. So, and that's the ironically that's the biggest. Is
that by design as well? Not playing to a click.
Space, the way they run it is Morgs, who's the MC DJ guy. He basically he's playing all the tracks from the decks. So, and he's like DJing properly. Okay, so it's like he's scratching and stopping and starting. Yeah. So there's not really room to have a click. So, so it's kind of free in that sense. Even though the songs are the songs and they're still the length that they are and everything, but within that there's still some space. So
do you need to be able to see his hands?
Probably. It's not something I've actually ever thought about. It's just a matter of you kind of like I learned the songs as best I could.
Yep.
And I feel like it's one of those gigs. Each time I do it, it's like I kind of learn it a bit better because the first time I did it and got through it, like it was very little like prep time, and like I said, it was our big show. Like I think that like at the time they just put out the record with like 21 grams and all that, so it was with the hood. So like they were blowing up a lot at the time. Yep. And I think and they just come off some massive touring and like international touring and stuff, and then I kind of jumped in, and the festival was like 20,000 people, and it was a late slot, so I think we were we were just after Peking Duck, so it was like that sort of level of Australian. And if you're familiar with Australian festivals, like that's like the Duck Boys and everything, they're kind of up there, you know. So they're always headlining everything. So that was a really cool experience. But definitely thrown in the deep end, and definitely like again playing that sort of thing without a click and that sort of volume and everything was like quite hectic at the time. But again, I think throwing back to my experience of playing along to records as a kid, it was kind of like I knew what I had to do. It was just I'd just never done it in front of thousands of people before. So, but you know, I was game enough to jump in. So I think it turned out okay. I ended up getting the call back, so that was nice. And then ended up doing like a solo tour with one of the guys as well, and then been kind of doing everything since. They've just done a run like through December, which I had a bunch of clashes with, but it ended up being like the shows were a little bit more regional, so they were smaller, so they could kind of get away with doing it without drums. So it kind of worked out. But yeah, we did earlier in the year we did like I said, a tour coming off the New Year's stuff, and that kind of went through January and February. But I love those boys, man. That they're such legends, and the gig is I dig a bunch of the music a lot. And another really guy that's become a really good mate of mine, Tom Crawford, has kind of stepped in more recently. And then Nick, who's Horror Show, who's another like legend Aussie hip hop artist as well, has been doing some shows recently as well. So he was on the tour too. So it's always such a great hang, and the engineers and the production guys and everything are all like they're all mates. So it's such a good time. And we'll see what's coming up for those guys. But we're back again. But yeah, so that's kind of been the hip hop thing, and then like Tkay obviously has a bunch of hip hop kind of influence as well. It's not as kind of straight hip hop, but she definitely can rap, and definitely that's part of the gig for sure. But yeah, man, but that influenced me, like listening to Jay and watching Tony with Jay, and like that whole thing is like definitely influences how I approach those shows, and and with the Thunders thing, like Carl, it's interesting actually working with different artists, because you always, if there's an MD, it's the approach is always different, and you kind of learn you have to be able to adapt to whatever you're getting asked to do, or not getting asked to do, So if it's Carl or Yanya or someone like that, it's like they hire you because they want you to do you, and they want you to. There's almost like very little spoken. There's almost like little to no direction. If they don't like something, they'll point it out, or if they want to hear more of something, they'll point it out. But it's not like, okay, let's start here and I'll show you how it's done. It's kind of like
they know what you're getting.
Basically,
they know what they're getting when you turn up.
Yeah. Whereas, and again, no approach is right or wrong, but there are some other MDs that I've worked for that are a little bit more particular about what they want to hear, and again, that could be coming from anywhere. It could be coming from management. It could be coming from and everyone's taste is different as well, and everyone has a different focus. Like working with Joel is interesting because he's quite focused on I think the overall sound. Like obviously he has a lot of experience in broadcasting and things like that. So as well as playing drums and as well as like everything he does. So that's a kind of a different approach to everything's like quite sound orientated versus kind of the playing aspect. The playing is there, but it's a slightly different approach. Whereas with some of the other guys, it's like, it's everything is all there. It's kind of just in different degrees depending on who you're working with.
Yep.
And then like working with someone like Billy as well, he's like very much like he'll be talking to me on the mic during the show, and he'll be like, "Why are you like? Where's the rest of it?" Kind of thing. Like play more. Like give us more.
You up.
Yeah, that kind of thing. Like really geeing you up as you're going, which is again
That's
a different
awesome.
approach again. So, because like obviously with Yanya, like if I'm on Yanya's gigs, like Yanya's not there, so it's usually because I'm subbing for him, or so every situation is kind of different. But I think if you can, for me, it's and like I said, I'm not an expert by any means, but learning to kind of definitely set like the ego aside and definitely put the music first, and not set your self-worth aside and not set your self-esteem aside, but just going there wanting to make the show the best you can, essentially, and taking on all the direction and trying to convey that the best you can, as well as bringing all your experience and all your knowledge and skill set to the thing as well. Otherwise you wouldn't be there, so it's kind of a blend of all of that, and then like I said, you're dealing with in each situation you're dealing with different variations of rehearsal time and of how much time have you had to learn the music and how much time has that passed since you've done the last show with this crew, or have you ever done a show with them before, or are you rehearsing at all? Like, there's always different things. Is it a production rehearsal, or are you just rocking up to a rehearsal where you're not even on in-ears, but on the show there's going to be a full thing? So it's like you've kind of got to be able to adapt to all of that. And as sometimes frustrating as it can be, like for me, obviously, as you can tell, like I would probably like to rehearse for like a month with every show before we hit the stage, and like really dial everything in and get everything exactly how we want it, so that by the time we hit the run, we're firing. Whereas I often find with me, it's like we'll rehearse once or twice maybe, and then you're on like a 3-4 show tour, and then it's done. Or it's like a one-off show and then it's done. It's like, so often in my experience recently, there's kind of very little time to really settle in to something. So you're kind of flying by the seat of your pants a little bit. But I think there's a skill in kind of doing that and maybe setting aside some of the perfectionist sort of mentality and going, it's going to be what it's going to be. Like, you got to trust what you can do and just know that you're going to bring your best to whatever the situation is. And the other thing as a session musician is often you're juggling multiple things at the same time. So, if you get the call for a thing on a Tuesday, like the Thunders thing, and you get to set the music on a Friday, and then you're flying out on Saturday, like in between that time, I've probably done 3 or 4 other things, even if it's just life stuff, there's other stuff going on. And then it's like, you got a limited amount of time to learn the music, and then but the show's still happening. No one at the festival cares. No one on the show cares. It's like, it's happening whether you like it or not. and you just got to get it done. And obviously, to varying degrees, that is successful. But I think if you have the approach of just wanting to do your best and just and bringing your best to whatever the circumstances may be, then I think you kind of find yourself getting the call back, and if it's a subbing situation, then next time they need a sub, maybe they call you again, and never kind of, and if it is, that's the other thing about subbing, like I said, I've kind of been fortunate to do a bunch of, and for me, like I kind of really try to put, and something my dad instilled in me, like putting integrity first and like all those sorts of things, those kind of personal skills. So the idea of like trying to, which that does happen, trying to like snake gigs and people trying to like, once they're on something, trying to like get too, not like too friendly, but like, you know what I mean? Like there are all those sort of, because it's such a people industry, and like none of us are, speaking for myself anyway, I'm not contracted on any of these things. It's all very much like, are you available? Are you, what's the rate? Let's do it, sort of thing. And if it falls through, sorry, it's not like you're not really covered in any way, and there's no guarantee of future employment or work. So it's all very much like you live or die by the thing you've just done or the thing you're about to do. So, so I think, being able to be respectful enough and appreciative enough of when, you do get called to maybe jump in for something, and in that sort of context, and just know that it is what it is, and, be a nice person, be a great, bring what you can to the performance side of it, and then thanks. And then you move on, you know what I mean? You don't try and, follow up and like try and do any of that stuff,
Yeah.
and it just, and the reality is if you do, it just doesn't, it won't happen again, so yeah. And for me, like subbing has become almost like a part-time job,
Yeah.
Like if Boston can't do something, or if, whoever, it's like I often get a call to jump in, and they know that I'm going to, come as prepared as I can, and again within the given circumstances, and I'm going to be, okay to hang out with, and then get the job done and then get out of there, sort of thing, So it's like a trust and reliability sort of thing, I guess. But again, super, stoked to get those sort of calls in the first place. So it never would have crossed my mind to like take advantage of it, So, and like I said, these guys become mates, and that trumps any sort of gig offer or anything like that. So all that sort of stuff kind of comes and goes, I find, and artists often come and go, and but friendships and relationships and that sort of thing tend to outlast all that sort of stuff, and being such a people industry, like it goes downhill very quickly, I think, if that sort of stuff is not in check or in place. And I'm fortunate that some of those ideas and traits and skills were kind of drilled into me quite heavily early on as a kid, almost to the point of like almost like sometimes underselling myself. So like, or if I do meet someone who's like, in theory, like potentially someone I could be working with, I'm like kind of like do the opposite and like play things down, and like that's very much which I'm happy with. That's fine. But you know, some people are great at the networking and the talking and all that sort of stuff. It's not really me, but
some people, that's all they can do, right?
Yeah,
All due respect to some.
Yeah, totally. I mean, it's definitely a part of it, but but yeah, I was listening. Actually, Dad was listening to something the other day. Vinny talking, he was saying like how when he moved to LA, he you know, he didn't do the business card thing. He didn't do any of that. He was, which obviously a different era, you know, he's talking 70s, 80s time, but he was just kind of like, if someone asked me to play in a jam situation or whatever, like he would just get up and he would play, and obviously people saw pretty quickly that this guy's, you know, who he was. And you kind of, not comparing myself to Vinny, but in the sense of, I like the idea of kind of letting what you do kind of talk more so than anything you have to say verbally, you know. And that's what I think is cool. It's taken me a while to kind of get my head around it, but cool about social media. I think that it's almost like it's like the digital form of like, you know, I can't jam with everyone, but it's like here's like me doing something, and you might like it, cool. If not, that's cool. That's, you know,
cool. Don't watch it.
Yeah, you know, like whatever the vibe is, but it took me a while, man. Like I initially, like when I first started playing with Ricki, like I was a kid in school that did not have like Facebook. I didn't have MySpace. I didn't have any of that. And then like left school, kind of got Facebook, and I was like, oh, I realized I've kind of missed out on a whole world here. Because again, I was just so focused on what I was doing.
Yep.
And then like Instagram came around, and that took me a while. I remember I got it, and like I posted something, and everyone's like, oh, holy shit, like you're alive, or like the first post, haha. It's like, surprised to see you on here.
Yeah.
Then like wouldn't post anything for ages, and like had myself on private forever, and I'm like, there was something weird. I was just maybe a little bit too insular, or like, not that I'm like not a social person, but there was something I just hadn't made the connection yet between like how I could use it or how it could be utilized as a business tool and now it's like not only that for me, but it is a way to connect with people that I, you know, wouldn't have been able to connect with previously, and whether they are musicians or not, or
well, you and me, man.
Well, yeah, totally. You know, it's a classic example, you know. Yep. So, and there's been, you know, a bunch of people in that sort of way. And like I mentioned earlier about certain drummers and stuff like that, like, or other musicians, like you go to shows and now you have the option to, you know, you can tag people and you can connect that way, or like even just expose, like give people their, you know, props, flowers sort of thing, and, you know, make sure people know who's doing what. And I, you know, that's just a kind of a subtle way for me to, that I like to do for mates and people that I like, again, like I said, I respect, and yeah, there are so of which there are so many, and I definitely haven't mentioned everyone, but
yeah, don't even try.
I was like, oh man, I'm gonna forget so many people.
Yeah.
But, yeah, bro.
I should have told you that at the start. I said, don't try and remember everyone, Jack, because part 2, or you'll call me up and say, like, I forgot someone.
Just intercutting my influences.
Yeah. But man, look, for a 32-year-old, as intelligent as you are, with the facility that you have, the groove that you have, your attitude, man, I think I'll be watching you for years and years to come,
man,
and you'll always be working.
Thanks, bro. I appreciate that.
I'm very, very impressed, mate. So I wish you all the best.
Man. And man, thank you.
Really chuffed that we got to sit here.
Yeah, man, same. I'm stoked. Like I said before, I was like, I'd listened to a bunch of, I mean, obviously you've interviewed a bunch of guys I know and are friends with, and people I don't know, and I listened to a bunch of them through COVID, and which was like an interesting experience, going back and listening, like hearing stories that you've maybe heard in person from the person, but hearing like in a different light, and hearing slightly different details.
Or the actual story.
Or the actual, totally. Sorry, the real version. So it was really cool, and yeah, I think it's, you know, what you're doing, bringing kind of highlighting local guys is amazing, man. And there are a bunch of people on the podcast that you've interviewed that I haven't even met, like guys like David Jones and people like that, who are also been big influences for me, and like I mentioned, Gordo, and David Jones, was another big, like Dad was a massive fan of David Jones, you know,
I've said it before, but walking away from that interview with him, and that was in the middle of Marrickville in a flight path outside a coffee shop.
That's the thing. You're on the interviews now in airport vicinity.
The coffee, and people walking past and asking us questions and all that.
Yeah.
But anyway, I walked away from that interview changed.
Yeah, for sure.
He had that much impact on me that day, even till today.
Yeah, I mean, obviously
it's just heavy, man. I was, you know.
Yeah, absolutely.
He's a pretty special human.
For sure. Really, and he's gone, far above his facility and his ability as a drummer and as a musician. He's obviously taken, you know, a really unique and interesting approach to spirituality and all that. And I've been fortunate to hang with him a couple of times, and each time he's such a beautiful spirit, and every now and then they'll repost like someone, maybe it's like Roger McLaughlin or someone who was in Pyramid, like will repost the gig of them at Montreux, and I don't know if you've seen that show, but because again we had got some people checking us out.
We're recording a podcast. The Gig Life podcast. The Gig Life podcast. The Gig. We talk about. He's a musician.
Just a bunch of musos talking.
Yeah.
Just a bunch of musicians talking.
You can, if you can't hear, come round.
Oh no, we got an audience.
We've got an audience now.
A strange turn of events. Welcome to the Late Show.
Hello.
She's trying to steal a cup.
Oh, amazing. Very different. That's cool.
How are you?
Hey, what's up? Nice to meet you. Sorry?
You work for the Rocks?
No. We're trying to get a job.
Yeah.
No.
That's right.
I'm trying to steal a drink, and then she pulls. Holding my leg. Cool. Are you recording at the moment?
Yeah. So you're part of it now.
No, you're in.
I'm going to leave it in.
Staying.
I'm going to leave it in.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You look a lot like a really good drummer from Sydney called Miles Thomas.
Wow.
But,
He does.
you walk past?
Guess what my name is?
Miles. Oh, fuck.
It's
I was
Thomas.
gonna say, Thomas.
Thomas Miles.
I was like, is that Milesy walking past?
Yeah.
Does Miles play or do we play?
All of you.
We're like session musicians, man, so a whole bunch of different stuff. But
Oh, cool.
yeah.
If you listen to the podcast, you'll know everything he's done.
Yeah, all my deepest, darkest secrets. Yeah.
It's like a secret.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. It's not really. But
So, yeah.
That's really fun.
Awesome.
Enjoy. Okay,
Thank
well,
you.
I'll listen.
Appreciate it.
Do you get one more listener? It's me.
Thank you very
Absolutely.
much. Really
Sure.
appreciate it.
Okay.
See you
Thanks
guys.
so much, guys. Catch you later. Do you reckon they're fans of David Jones?
Possibly.
They don't look like Pyramid fans,
No.
but they might. They might be. But yeah, man, that record, the Pyramid record, was one that we had at home, and Dad had like a bunch of like bootleg cassette tapes as well, of like David playing stuff and Virgil playing stuff. Yeah, man. So in terms of Australian drummers, like early on, those two were like the guys. But yeah, man. Obviously David on the podcast, and he's such an incredible spirit, incredible musician, and yeah, kind of an unsung hero, really. Like he, in comparison to some of the other guys from Australia, he's kind of a little bit more. I mean, musicians know for sure,
Of course.
but maybe by design. He's taken his own path, and
Sure
full
has.
credit to him. I saw him do a beautiful show with Phil Toso was playing keys, and I think Every was playing bass, who was on the Verge record, or some of it anyway, and yeah, this was years ago, man. But that was amazing, and but like I said, I've been fortunate enough to see him a bunch of times, and every time he's always incredible. So
Yeah, went and saw him play one of his. It was a solo gig at the Seymour Centre.
Right. Oh, amazing.
That was on the same night as the final Midnight Oil show. So that was last year. So no, sorry, that would have been. We're 24, aren't we? That would have been 22.
As in when Adam was playing?
Yeah.
Oh, beautiful.
Yeah.
I'm spewing. I missed that gig. It would have been cool to see. Adam
Yeah, so
on that.
we were at the second best gig in town.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
But yeah,
Absolutely.
he was amazing. He was amazing.
Yeah,
He
man,
really was.
for sure. Yeah, incredible soloist, and and just musician across the board for sure. Yeah, man.
Good stuff. All right, Jack, my boat. Thanks
Call
again,
it?
man.
Absolutely,
Yeah,
man. Thank you
all
so
right,
much for
brother.
having me, bro. I
Sweet-
appreciate it.
Sweet as-
Stoked we got to do it finally.
Yeah, me too. All right, brother.
brother.
Thank
Love
you,
you,
man.
mate. Thank
See
you.
brother.